I stood in the mill shed that September morning in 1968, watching Grandpa Owen freeze like somebody had cut the power to his entire body. 40 seconds passed, maybe longer. I counted heartbeats because I couldn't count anything else. His weathered hands hung at his sides. The overnight bag he'd been carrying dropped somewhere behind him, forgotten. His eyes traced the lines of the Frick sawmill like he was seeing it for the first time, or maybe seeing a ghost he'd thought was finally buried. The machine looked different. It was different. I'd made sure of that. The blade guides gleamed with fresh engineering, the pulley system hung with new precision, the steam governor sat adjusted to tolerances I'd calculated across 6 months of midnight mathematics. Everything about that sawmill spoke of resurrection. Everything about my grandfather's face spoke of a man watching his worst nightmare bloom back to life in polished steel and measured hope. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why Grandpa stood there like the ground had opened beneath him, you need to know about that Sunday in June of 1967 when everything started to crack open. The Hartwell place sat on 320 acres of Montana timber country, 18 miles outside Kalispell, where the roads turned from pavement to gravel, and the trees grew so thick the afternoon sun came through in shafts like cathedral light. Our house was a log cabin built in the 20s, solid Douglas fir logs that had weathered to the color of old leather. The chinking needed work. It always needed work. The roof shingles curled at the edges where rain and snow had worked at them for decades, but the bones of the place were strong. My father used to say a house built from trees that grew on the land it stood on would never fall down. He was right about that, at least. The sawmill shed stood 200 feet from the main house, a barn-sized structure that smelled permanently of sawdust and machine oil and steam. Inside that shed sat the Frick portable band sawmill, 60 inches of blade length, steam-powered, built in 1941 and bought by my grandfather in 1946 when he came back from the Pacific with money saved and dreams of building something that would last. For 15 years that machine had turned raw timber into finished lumber. For 15 years it had kept our family fed and housed and moving forward. Then in 1961 it killed my father, and Grandpa Owen shut it down like you'd close a coffin lid. 6 years of silence. 6 years of that blade sitting still while the forest kept growing and our debts kept mounting, and everything my father had believed in slowly rusted into memory. My name is Jesse Hartwell. I was 15 years old that summer of 1967. 15 and tall enough to be mistaken for older if you didn't look at my face, which still carried the soft edges of boyhood no matter how much I wished otherwise. I was lean in the way kids get when they work hard and eat just enough, all angles and elbows and hands that seemed too large for the rest of me. My hair was dark brown, cut short because long hair got caught in machinery, and my hands carried calluses that mapped out every tool I'd learned to hold. I wore my father's old flannel shirts with the cuffs rolled back and the pockets stuffed with measuring tape and carpenter's pencils and folding rulers. The shirts smelled like him still, or maybe I just imagined they did. 7 years gone, and sometimes I could still catch the scent of sawdust and Copenhagen tobacco if I pressed the collar to my face. I wasn't like other kids at Glacier High School. Didn't talk much, didn't have friends, spent lunch periods in the library reading Popular Mechanics and marking up notebooks with gear ratios and stress calculations. The other kids thought I was strange. They were right. While they listened to Beatles records and talked about cars and girls and football, I was teaching myself mechanical engineering from books written for college students. While they went to dances and parties, I was in our barn taking apart old equipment to understand how the pieces fit together. My sister Rachel was the only one who understood me. She was 19 that summer, home from University of Montana in Missoula where she studied nursing. Rachel was everything I wasn't. Beautiful in an effortless way, With blonde hair, she could actually manage and social graces that made people comfortable. She'd graduated high school as valedictorian, voted most likely to succeed, most likely to change the world. She was organized and graceful and knew how to talk to people without making them wish they were somewhere else. But she never made me feel defective for being different. "You don't need to be like everyone else, Jess," she'd tell me when she came home on weekends. "You just need to be yourself. Good enough is usually good enough for most people." Easy for her to say. She fit in everywhere she went. My grandfather, Owen Hartwell, was 68 years old that summer. Tall and lean as a lodgepole pine, skin weathered to the texture of old bark from 40 years working timber in Montana weather. His hands were scarred in ways that told stories he never spoke out loud. A missing thumbnail from a chain slip in 1952. White marks across his knuckles from hot metal touching skin. Calluses so deep they looked permanent, like the wood grain had transferred itself into his flesh through decades of contact. He'd fought in the Pacific during World War II, combat engineer with the 1st Marine Division. He'd built bridges under fire on Guadalcanal, cleared paths through jungle on Peleliu, watched friends die in ways he never described. The only thing he ever said about the war was this: "Good equipment, maintained right, saves lives. Learned that on Guadalcanal." Then his jaw would set and the conversation was over, same as every conversation about anything that mattered deeply. After the war, he came home to Montana with saved pay and bought the Frick sawmill and 320 acres of timber land. He married my grandmother Margaret and built the log cabin and started milling lumber for every ranch and construction project within 50 miles. He was the best sawyer in Flathead County. Everyone said so. He could look at a log and know exactly how the blade should cut, could hear problems in the steam engine before they became failures, could maintain equipment so precisely it ran for decades without major repairs. Every evening at 5 o'clock, before the war and after it, he would walk out to the mill shed and spend an hour with that Frick, checking blade tension, greasing bearings, adjusting steam pressure, running his hands over belts and pulleys like a farmer checking livestock. It was a religious ritual. Maybe it was religion itself. Maybe that machine was the only God he still believed in after whatever he'd seen in the Pacific. The sawmill meant even more after my father died. Thomas Hartwell was 26 years old in April of 1961. I was 9. The details of what happened lived in the spaces between what people would tell me, in the way adults edited their sentences when I walked into rooms. There was an accident, they said. At the sawmill, they said. He didn't suffer, they said, like that made it better. But I knew more than they thought. I'd been there that morning. Not in the shed when it happened, but close enough to hear. Close enough to hear the scream of metal going wrong, the change in the steam engine's pitch from working smooth to working violent. Close enough to hear my grandfather's voice breaking as he yelled for help that would come too late. Grandpa found him. The blade had shattered. They said operator error, said my father had pushed the equipment too hard, said he'd been trying to modify the feed rate to mill faster. The investigation took 3 days and concluded with official words that meant nothing. Accidental death. Operator negligence. Case closed. After that, Grandpa salvaged what he could from the Frick, stored the parts, rebuilt it over 6 months working alone in the mill shed with the doors closed. When he finished, he rolled it to the back corner and forbade anyone from touching it ever again. "Equipment this dangerous needs respect," he said. Tom didn't respect it. It killed him. That was the full explanation I ever got. We switched to a smaller portable sawmill after that. Slower, safer, half the output. The financial loss was significant, but Grandpa wouldn't discuss it. Wouldn't discuss anything about the Frick. It sat in the corner of the mill shed like a monument to everything we'd lost, gathering dust and rust in silence. But Grandpa still did the evening ritual. Every day at 5 he'd walk out to the mill shed, and I'd watch from the cabin window as he stood in front of the frick for a few minutes. Just stood there, not touching it, not maintaining it, just looking. Then he'd walk back out and the day would continue like nothing had happened. My grandmother, Margaret Hartwell, was 65 that summer. Silver hair always pinned in a practical bun, always wearing an apron with tiny flower prints she'd sewn herself. Her hands were stained with ink from the ledger she kept, thick as a Bible and twice as sacred. She managed every penny we had like a general deploying limited troops. She knew exactly where we stood financially at any given moment, could recite our debt to the dollar, could tell you how many board feet of lumber we'd need to mill to make next month's payment. The ledger lived in the kitchen drawer. Sometimes I'd see her late at night, lamplight making shadows on her face, running her finger down columns of numbers like she was looking for an answer that wasn't there. $5,247.18 in debt, $183.14 in savings, $52 a month for medication, $87 for food. The numbers never added up to enough. She'd been diagnosed with high blood pressure in 1963. The doctor prescribed medication that cost more than we could easily afford, but Grandma took it faithfully because the alternative was stroke or heart attack or an early grave. At least she took it mostly faithfully. I noticed sometimes she'd skip doses, claiming she'd forgotten, but I saw the way she portioned the pills out to make them last longer, saw the way she'd buy the cheaper cuts of meat and claim she preferred them anyway. Being smart isn't knowing what to do, she'd tell me when I sat at the kitchen table doing homework while she worked the ledger. It's knowing when not to do something. That was her philosophy. Caution over action. Preservation over risk. It had kept us alive through hard times, but it had also kept us stuck in place while debts mounted and opportunities passed by. Rachel sent home $60 a month from her part-time work at the hospital in Missoula. It wasn't much, but it was steady, and steady money had value beyond its amount. It meant someone was thinking of us, working for us, caring about whether we made it through another month. Rachel had that effect. She made you feel less alone just by existing somewhere in the world. The Frick sawmill itself deserves its own description, because it wasn't just a machine. It was a presence. 60-inch blade length meant it could handle logs up to 5 feet in diameter. The blade itself was a loop of spring steel with teeth cut at precise angles, running on 2 wheels driven by a steam-powered engine. When it ran, that blade moved at 90 feet per second. 90 feet per second of sharpened steel cutting through wood that had taken a century to grow. One mistake, one moment of inattention, one mechanical failure, and that blade could cut through a man as easily as timber. The steam engine sat beside the blade assembly, a beautiful piece of 1940s engineering, all brass fittings and cast iron strength. It burned wood scraps for fuel, built pressure in a boiler that drove pistons that turned wheels that spun the blade. The whole system was interconnected, each part depending on every other part, the kind of mechanical symphony that required understanding and respect and constant attention. My father had understood it. He'd started learning to operate the Frick when he was 16, training under Grandpa for years before being allowed to run it alone. By the time he was 25, he was as good a sawyer as Grandpa, maybe better. He had ideas about improving it, making it more efficient, increasing the feed rate so we could mill more lumber in less time. Grandpa had told him to leave it alone. Told him the machine worked fine as it was, that modifications were risky, that old equipment didn't like being changed. My father had modified it anyway. That's what killed him. At least that's what everyone believed. The financial crisis came to a head in June of 1967. We'd been struggling for years, but struggling was normal. We were used to tight months and delayed payments and making do with less. What changed was the opportunity. The Forest Service put out a contract for 40,000 board feet of milled lumber, payment of $5,800, delivery required within 8 weeks. 40,000 board feet was more than we typically milled in 3 months. The portable sawmill could manage maybe 500 board feet a day on good days. We'd need 715 board feet per day, every day for 8 weeks, to meet the contract. It was impossible with our current equipment. It would be easy with the Frick. That machine could mill 1,200 board feet a day without straining, but the Frick sat silent in the corner, forbidden, untouchable, haunted by my father's death and Grandpa's fear. The crisis came to my attention on a Sunday in mid-June. June 18th specifically. Hot morning, church service where Reverend Michaels mentioned the Forest Service contract in passing, wondering aloud if any local mills would bid. Lunch at home was Grandma's roast chicken and potatoes, and green beans from the garden. Everyone quiet around the table, the way families get when money troubles are pressing, but nobody wants to speak them out loud. That afternoon, I was in the barn organizing tools when I heard a truck engine I didn't recognize. Not the familiar rattle of our neighbors' old Fords and Chevys, but something newer, smoother, expensive. I walked to the barn door and saw Derek Whitmore climbing out of a new Ford F-250, forest green with chrome that caught the sun like a challenge. Derek was 17, a year ahead of me at Glacier High, son of Samuel Whitmore, who owned Whitmore Timber Corporation, the biggest sawmill operation in the county. 500 acres, 20 employees, contracts with every major construction company within 100 miles. The Whitmores had money the way we had debts, casually and constantly. Derek drove his own truck, wore new clothes without oil stains, had perfect teeth from orthodontist visits we couldn't afford. He was handsome in the way that comes from good genetics and better nutrition, and he knew it. He wandered over to where Grandpa was checking fence posts, hands in his pockets like he owned the place. I stayed in the barn doorway, watching, listening. "Saw your old Frick in the shed," Derek said, loud enough that I could hear from 50 feet away. "My dad says antique sawmills like that belong in museums. Says it's amazing yours still exists, even if it doesn't run anymore." Grandpa didn't answer, just kept checking fence posts with the same methodical attention he gave everything. Derek looked around our property, taking in the aging cabin, the barn that needed new shingles, the modest spread that couldn't compare to Whitmore land. "Heard the Forest Service is taking bids for that lumber contract. Don't bother trying with that portable toy you're using now. You'd never make the deadline. Need real equipment for real work." He turned then, saw me standing in the barn doorway. His grin got wider. "Oh, right. You're the weird kid from school, the one who reads textbooks at lunch." He laughed, not meanly exactly, but not kindly either. "Probably don't understand much about real sawmill work anyway, do you? That's man's business. Practical business." My hands curled into fists. I stayed quiet, watching. Grandpa still didn't respond, didn't even look up from his fence checking. Derek stood there a moment longer, waiting for reaction he wasn't going to get, then climbed back in his truck and drove away, leaving dust hanging in the afternoon air like an insult. I spent the rest of the day angry. Angry at Derek for his arrogance, angry at Grandpa for not defending us, angry at myself for not speaking up, angry at the whole situation that put us in a position where a 17-year-old kid could mock our livelihood and be right about it. We couldn't take that contract. We couldn't compete. We were failing slowly while people like the Whitmores got richer off equipment and opportunities we'd never have. That evening I couldn't sleep. Lay in bed listening to the house settle, to crickets outside my window, to the occasional creak of old logs shifting in the cooling night air. Around 10 o'clock I heard voices from the kitchen. Low, serious, the kind of conversation adults have when they think kids are asleep. I got up, eased my bedroom door open just enough to hear. "We can't take the contract, Maggie. Grandpa's voice, tired in a way I'd never heard. We'd need 40,000 feet in 8 weeks. The portable mill won't do it. You know it won't. What if we use the frick? Grandma's voice, quieter, testing the waters. Silence, long enough that I thought maybe the conversation was over. No, Grandpa finally said. Just that one word, flat and final. Owen, we're losing the ranch. Grandma's voice carried weight now, urgency. The bank is due October 15th. We owe $5,200. We have $183. Without that contract. I said no. Grandpa's voice harder now. That machine killed our son, Margaret. I won't risk Jesse. I won't. Then what do we do? I don't know, maybe we. His voice broke, actually broke, something I'd never heard. Maybe we should sell, move to town, find other work. Silence again. And then a sound I'd never heard before and never wanted to hear again. Grandma Margaret crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just small broken sounds that made something crack open in my chest. She was the strong one, the spine that held us upright, and hearing her cry felt like watching the foundation of our house crumble. I eased my door closed, sat on my bed in the dark, stared at nothing while my mind raced. We were going to lose the ranch, the place my grandfather had built after surviving a war, the place my father had died trying to improve, the 320 acres of timber and history and everything that made us who we were. We were going to lose it because we couldn't mill enough lumber fast enough with safe equipment. But we had equipment that could do it, sitting silent in the mill shed. Forbidden, yes. Dangerous, yes, but possible. The idea started forming then, though I didn't recognize it fully yet. Just a whisper in the back of my mind asking what if? What if the frick could be made safer? What if my father's modifications had been right but implemented wrong? What if I could finish what he'd started, do it better, prove it could be done? The next morning, Monday, June 19th, I went up to the attic while Grandpa was out checking timber stands, and Grandma was at the general store in town. The attic was hot and dusty, full of boxes and trunks nobody had sorted through in years, because sorting through them meant facing memories we'd collectively decided to avoid. I found my father's things in the back corner, a leather millwright's case containing specialized tools, a stack of notebooks filled with calculations and sketches, a wooden box of precision measuring instruments, and underneath it all, a journal bound in oilcloth, my father's name stamped on the cover in fading gold letters. I sat on the attic floor in the heat and dust and opened that journal. His handwriting looked like mine, or maybe mine looked like his. Neat, careful letters slanting slightly right, the marks of someone who thought before writing. The entries started in 1958 when he was 23, just married to my mother, just starting to take over more sawmill responsibilities from Grandpa. I flipped through pages about timber prices and blade maintenance and weather patterns that affected wood curing. Then I found an entry dated March 15, 1961, 5 weeks before he died. Today I tested modification to the blade tension system. Thought I could increase feed rate 35% by changing pulley ratios and adjusting the steam governor spring pressure. Failed completely. Blade wobbled, nearly shattered. Dad is furious. Says I'm reckless with equipment that doesn't forgive mistakes. Maybe he's right, but someone will figure out how to make these old mills run better, safer, more efficient. Maybe it'll be Jesse, my smart boy. He understands mechanical systems better at 9 than I did at 20. He'll be better than I was. He'll do it right. I sat there holding my father's journal, 7 years of missing him crushing down like physical weight. He'd believed in me, written it down, left it there like a message he knew I'd eventually find. He thought I could do this, thought I'd be better than he was. That's when the idea stopped being a whisper and became a plan. For the next 6 weeks I prepared. Every day after morning chores were done, I'd ride my bicycle 3 miles into Kalispell to the public library. Mrs. Ellen Porter, the head librarian, was a widow in her 60s who loved books more than people and appreciated anyone who shared that love. She helped me find technical manuals on sawmill mechanics, metallurgy texts about blade composition and stress tolerances, engineering references about steam engine governors and belt drive ratios. This for a school project. She asked the third time I came in requesting specialized books. Sort of, I said, just trying to understand how things work. She looked at me over her reading glasses, saw through the lie but didn't press. She started setting aside books she thought I'd find useful, ordering materials through interlibrary loan from Montana State University. Within 2 weeks, I had access to references that would normally require a college engineering degree. I filled 6 notebooks with calculations and diagrams, drew 52 different versions of how the Frick's pulley system could be modified to increase blade speed while maintaining stability, calculated stress tolerances for different blade tensions, worked out steam pressure curves for optimal power delivery. I was teaching myself mechanical engineering through necessity and obsession, and I was getting good at it. But I knew reading about sawmills and actually running one were completely different things. I needed practical training, hands-on experience, someone who could teach me what books couldn't explain. That's when I thought of Carl Winston. Carl was 61 years old, retired millwright who'd run saw crews for Champion Timber Company for 30 years before his knees gave out and forced him into retirement. He lived 5 miles outside town in a small house with a shop building out back. Everyone in timber country knew Carl. He was legend, the man who could diagnose mill problems by sound alone, who could sharpen a blade to perfection blindfolded, who'd never had a serious accident in 3 decades of dangerous work. I rode my bicycle to his place on a Saturday in late July. Hot day, legs aching from the ride, shirt soaked with sweat by the time I reached his driveway. He was in his shop, working on something I couldn't identify, wearing old coveralls and safety glasses. "Help you, son?" he asked without looking up from his work. "I'm Jesse Hartwell. My father was Thomas Hartwell." That got his attention. He set down his tools, pulled off his safety glasses, looked at me with eyes that had seen a lot of years and missed very little. "Tom's boy, you've grown. Last time I saw you, you were about knee-high." "Yes, sir, I was wondering. I'm trying to learn about sawmills. Old band sawmills specifically. Thought maybe you could teach me some things." "This for school?" "No, sir, it's personal." He studied me for a long moment. "Why you really want to know, boy?" I decided honesty was the only approach that might work. I found my father's journal, found his plans for modifying our Frick. I think I can finish what he started. Do it right this time." Carl went very still. "You know what happened to your father?" "Yes, sir." "And you still want to mess with that sawmill?" "It's not messing with it, it's understanding it, making it better, safer. My father had the right ideas, he didn't have time to finish them properly." Carl walked over to his workbench, pulled out a folding chair, sat down heavy. "Your daddy was brilliant, Jesse, also stubborn. Didn't like asking for help. Thought he could figure everything out alone. That's what killed him." He paused, looked me dead in the eye. "You asking for help now?" "Yes, sir, that's exactly what I'm doing." Something in my answer satisfied him. He nodded once sharp. "All right, I'll teach you, but we do it right. My pace, my methods, my safety rules. You don't skip steps, you don't take shortcuts, you don't assume you know better. Agreed?" "Agreed." For the next 4 weeks, I spent every available hour at Carl's shop. He had an old decommissioned band sawmill in his back lot, smaller than the Frick but same basic principles. He started me at the beginning. Here's how you check blade tension. Here's how you read the sound of the steam engine. Here's how you know when wood is about to bind. Here's how you adjust feed rate for different wood densities. I failed the first 3 practical tests he gave me. First attempt, I adjusted blade tension wrong and the whole assembly rattled apart when we tried to run it. Second time, I misjudged steam pressure and the governor malfunctioned. Third attempt, I welded a support bracket at the wrong angle and the metal cracked under stress. Each failure came with a lecture. This is why you test before you commit, Carl would say. This is why you measure 3 times. This is why you never assume. Each failure was frustrating but also educational. I was learning what books couldn't teach: the feel of proper blade tension, the sound of correct steam pressure, the subtle indicators that separated working equipment from disasters waiting to happen. The fourth attempt, everything came together. We ran that practice mill for 6 hours straight, processed a full cord of pine, every cut clean, every adjustment smooth, the whole system working in harmony. When we shut down at the end of the day, Carl inspected the lumber and the equipment, checking for problems he didn't find. "You've got talent like your daddy," he said finally, "but you ask questions. You listen. You admit when you don't know something. That's the difference between living and dying in this work." By late August, I was confident I could operate a band sawmill safely and efficiently. I understood the mechanics, the dangers, the methods for avoiding those dangers. I'd practiced until the movements were automatic, until I could read a mill's condition by sound and feel and instinct. I was ready. The opportunity came the first week of September. Grandpa got a phone call from his cousin in Lewiston, Idaho. The cousin had fallen, broken her hip, needed help around her place for a week or so. Grandpa decided he should drive down, make sure she was taken care of properly. The drive was 8 hours each way, far enough that it made sense to stay a few days. Rachel volunteered to go with him. She could help with the medical care, make sure their cousin was stable before they left. Grandma decided to go too. She hadn't seen her sister-in-law in 5 years, and the break from ledgers and worry might do her good. That meant I'd be home alone for 5 days, September 5th through September 10th. 5 days to manage basic ranch work, feed the animals, keep things running. 5 days alone with the Frick sawmill. The night before they left, I lay in bed reviewing my plan for the 100th time. Every step mapped out, every tool accounted for, every safety measure considered. I thought about my father's journal, about his belief that I'd be better than he was. I thought about Grandma crying in the kitchen, about losing the ranch, about Derek Whitmore's smug face saying we couldn't compete. I thought about Carl's warning: "Your father didn't ask for help. That's what killed him. You're asking, that's good. But be careful anyway. Some machines don't forgive mistakes, no matter how prepared you think you are." I got out of bed around 11, went to my desk, wrote out a letter in my neatest handwriting, sealed it in an envelope, left it on the kitchen table. If you're reading this, it means something went wrong. I modified the Frick sawmill while you were gone. I know I shouldn't have done it without permission. I know you'll be angry, but I had to try. We're losing the ranch, and I couldn't watch that happen without doing something. Whatever happened, it's not Carl Winston's fault. He taught me the right way to do things. If I got hurt, it's because I made a mistake he warned me about. Please don't blame him. Please don't blame yourselves. I did this because I love you, because I love this place, because I wanted to finish what Dad started. If I failed, I'm sorry. Jesse. I sealed the envelope, left it where they'd find it if they needed to. September 5th arrived cool and clear, the kind of Montana morning where the air tastes like pine and possibility. Grandpa's truck pulled away at 4:30 in the morning, taillights disappearing down the gravel road while I stood in the cabin doorway pretending to be sleepy. I waved. They waved back. The sound of the engine faded into distance and silence. I stood there for 5 minutes after they were gone, listening to the morning birds, feeling the weight of what I was about to do settle onto my shoulders like a physical thing. This was it. The moment of decision. Start or walk away. Change everything or leave it alone. I walked to the mill shed. The morning light slanted through gaps in the barn walls, dust motes floating in the beams like snow that never landed. The Frick sawmill sat in the back corner where it had sat for 6 years, covered in a tarp that Grandpa draped over it like a shroud. I pulled the tarp off slowly. Underneath, the machine waited. Silent, patient, deadly, full of potential. I put my hand on the cold iron frame. Whispered out loud, "Dad, I'm going to do this right. I promise." Then I pulled out my father's journal, opened it to the last entry, read his words one more time. Jesse will be better than I was. The sawmill sat waiting. Montana morning light turned the dusk gold. Somewhere in the forest, a woodpecker hammered at a dead tree, the sound carrying clear through still air. I took a breath, let it out slow, picked up the first tool. Work began. The first bolt fought me for 2 hours. Rusted solid where it connected the old pulley assembly to the main drive shaft, frozen by 6 years of Montana weather working its way into metal threads. I tried penetrating oil, let it soak for 30 minutes while I documented everything with my father's Polaroid camera. 47 photographs from every angle, each one carefully labeled and dated in the notebook I kept specifically for this project. If something went wrong, if I needed to restore the Frick to exactly how it had been, I'd need to know every detail. The bolt finally surrendered to a combination of heat from a propane torch and leverage from a breaker bar Carl had taught me to use properly. When it came free, the sudden release nearly sent me sprawling backward into the sawdust that layered the mill shed floor like snow that had forgotten how to melt. I caught myself, stood there breathing hard, looking at that single bolt in my hand like it was a trophy. One bolt. 40 more to go before I could even begin the actual modifications. September 5th was a Tuesday. The morning started at 6 with that first stubborn bolt and continued through a catalog of small discoveries that told stories my grandfather had never spoken out loud. The pulley system came apart piece by piece, each component revealing its history and where patterns and stress marks. I found a blade guide that had cracked sometime in the past, repaired with a weld that looked hasty, done quickly to get the mill running again rather than done right. I found a governor spring that had stretched beyond its proper tension, worn down by years of use, and never replaced because replacement parts cost money we didn't have. These weren't dramatic failures waiting to happen. They were subtle degradations, the kind of thing that accumulates over decades of hard use, the kind of thing that makes equipment unpredictable. I realized as I laid out the components on the workbench that my father's modifications probably weren't what killed him. The equipment was already compromised. He'd pushed a machine that was already on the edge, and it had pushed back. The thought made me angry and sad in equal measure. Angry that Grandpa had blamed my father for operator error when the equipment itself was failing. Sad that my father had died not knowing the machine had betrayed him before he'd made any mistakes. I wanted to show Grandpa these parts, make him understand, but that would require confessing what I was doing, and I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. By 10 in the morning, I had the old pulley system completely disassembled and laid out in order on a canvas tarp, every piece labeled with masking tape and numbered to match the photographs and sketches. The new governor spring I'd ordered from a machinist supply catalog in Billings sat ready in its packaging. It had cost $8.30, money I'd saved from 2 summers of odd jobs around Kalispell. $8.30 for a piece of spring steel 3 inches long. It seemed expensive until you understood that this spring controlled the steam pressure that drove the entire mill. Too little tension, and the blade would run slow and bind in the wood. Too much and the whole system would shake itself apart. The phone in the house rang at 10:15. I heard it from the mill shed, 4 sharp rings that meant someone was calling our party line. I ran to answer it, wiping grease off my hands with a rag. "Jess," it was Rachel calling from Lewiston. Her voice came through clearer than I expected, the connection surprisingly good. "We just got to Cousin Temperance's place. Wanted to check in. How's everything going?" "Fine," I said, trying to sound normal. "Just doing chores, feeding the chickens, the usual." "You sound out of breath." I was in the barn, ran to catch the phone. "Everything okay there? You sure?" "Yeah, Ratch, everything's fine. How's the cousin doing?" "Better than Grandpa expected. The hip's healing well. Doctor says she'll be back on her feet in a week or so." Rachel paused, and I could almost hear her thinking through the phone line. "Jess, you're not doing anything stupid, are you?" "Define stupid." "You know what I mean. You get ideas sometimes, big ideas, and you don't always think through the consequences." "I'm just taking care of the ranch like I said I would. I promise." Another pause. "Okay, but if something's wrong, you tell me, right?" "Right. We love you, little brother. Be safe." "Love you too." I hung up feeling guilty. I just lied to my sister, the one person in the family who'd never treated me like I needed protection from myself. But telling her the truth meant she'd worry, or worse, she'd tell Grandpa, and the whole project would end before it started. The afternoon was dedicated to the Governor Spring installation. This was delicate work, the kind where being off by an eighth of a turn could mean the difference between perfect operation and catastrophic failure. The spring fit into a housing that connected to the steam valve, and the tension on that spring determined how much steam pressure built up before the valve opened to bleed off excess. Too much pressure, and the drive belt could snap. Too little, and the blade wouldn't have enough power to cut through dense wood. I must have adjusted it 7 times, testing the tension with a gauge Carl had loaned me, comparing it against the specifications I'd calculated from my father's notes and my own research. Each time I thought I had it right, I'd find some small variance that wasn't quite perfect. The Montana afternoon stretched long and hot, sunlight slanting through the mill shed's gaps at angles that marked the hours better than any clock. Sweat dripped into my eyes. My hands cramped from holding tools at awkward angles. My back ached from bending over the workbench. But by 5 o'clock I had it. The Governor Spring sat at exactly the right tension, verified 3 different ways with 3 different measuring methods. It would hold. It would work. I was sure of it. That's when I hit the next problem. The blade itself needed to be retensioned, and that was a 2-person job. The blade was a loop of spring steel 60 inches in diameter, weighing about 40 pounds, flexible enough to bend but strong enough to cut through wood that had taken a century to grow. Tensioning it required stretching it between 2 wheels with exactly the right amount of force, not so loose it would wobble and not so tight it would snap. The process required one person to adjust the tension mechanism, while another person checked the blade alignment and tested the flex. Doing it alone was possible but dangerous. If the blade slipped while I was adjusting it, it could whip across the mill shed like a giant razor, and I'd be too close to avoid it. I needed help, which meant I needed Carl. I locked the mill shed, rode my bicycle the 5 miles to Carl's place through late afternoon heat that turned the gravel road into a shimmer of dust and distance. My legs burned from the ride, shirt soaked through with sweat by the time I turned into his driveway. He was in his shop like always, working on something that involved a welding torch and a lot of sparks. He shut down the torch when he saw me, pulled up his face shield. "Help you, Jesse. I need to borrow your blade tensioning tools, and maybe your help." He set down the torch with deliberate slowness, pulled off his welding gloves. "Really? What kind of tensioning?" The heavy-duty kind. His eyes narrowed. What are you working on, Jesse? I didn't answer, couldn't make myself say it out loud. You're touching the frick, aren't you? My silence was all the confession he needed. That's the stupidest thing you've ever tried to do. His voice wasn't angry, just flat and certain. You understand what you're risking. That sawmill killed your father. Your grandpa forbade anyone from touching it. And you're not just touching it, you're modifying it, without permission, while your family's out of town. I know, I said, but my voice came out stronger than I felt. But I have to try. We're losing the ranch, Carl. We owe more money than we can pay. That Forest Service contract would save us, but we can't mill enough lumber fast enough with the portable. The frick could do it. If I can make it work safely, prove it's reliable, maybe Grandpa would consider using it. Carl stared at me for a long moment. And you think if you do this in secret, modify it without asking, that'll convince your grandpa to trust it? I think if I do it in secret and it works, he'll have to admit it's possible. And if it doesn't work, at least I tried. You know what happens if you mess this up. That machine is all your family has. You break it, they lose everything. I know. And you're still going to do it. Yes. He shook his head slowly. You're either the bravest kid I've ever met or the dumbest. Maybe both. He walked over to a cabinet, pulled out a heavy canvas bag of tools. If you're determined to do something this insane, at least do it right. I'm coming with you. We worked together for the rest of that day and all of the next. Carl brought professional-grade equipment I couldn't have afforded or operated alone. A hydraulic tensioning frame that could stretch the blade with precise, controllable force. Alignment gauges that measured blade position to thousandths of an inch. Testing equipment that could verify tension without actually running the mill. The blade installation took 4 hours on September 6th. We started at 5 in the morning when the air was still cool and our hands were steady. The new blade I'd ordered had arrived 3 weeks earlier, 60 inches of Swedish steel that cost me $92, every cent of birthday and Christmas money I'd saved for 2 years. It came wrapped in oil paper and protective cloth, sharp enough to slice through leather if you weren't careful. Watch the teeth, Carl said as we unrolled it. Never grab a sawmill blade without gloves. Never assume it's dull just because it's new. Respect the equipment even when it's not running. We threaded the blade through the guide wheels with the kind of careful attention you'd use handling something alive and dangerous. Because in a way, it was both those things. Once that blade was running at 90 feet per second, it would have enough kinetic energy to cut through anything that got in its way, wood or bone or steel. Respect wasn't optional. It was survival. The tensioning process was methodical and precise. Carl would adjust the frame by tiny increments while I checked the alignment with a laser sight I'd borrowed from the high school physics lab. Too much to the left, half a degree, that's it, hold there. The morning stretched into afternoon, sunlight climbing across the mill shed floor like a slow tide. We stopped twice to drink water and let our hands rest. By 11 o'clock, the blade was mounted and tensioned, sitting between the guide wheels in perfect alignment. Carl ran his hands along it, feeling for any variation in the curve, any indication it wasn't seated properly. Then he did something I hadn't expected. He pressed his ear against the blade and tapped it lightly with a wooden mallet. The sound that came back was pure and clear, a musical note that hung in the air for several seconds. That's what perfect tension sounds like, he said. Remember that tone. If the blade ever sounds different, something's wrong. We tested the pulley system next, running it without the blade engaged to make sure everything turned smoothly. The steam boiler took an hour to build up pressure, burning scrap wood from a pile that had sat unused for 6 years. When the pressure gauge finally climbed into the operating range, Carl opened the valve and engaged the drive belt. The pulley spun up with a sound like wind rising, smooth and even, no wobble or vibration. The modified gear ratio I'd calculated gave the system exactly the speed increase I'd projected, 38% faster than the original setup. Carl watched with a critical eye, looking for any sign of stress or instability. After 10 minutes of steady operation, he shut it down and checked every bearing and belt connection. "Not bad," he admitted. "Your calculations were correct. The system's stable." Now the blade. Now we find out if all this work was worth anything. We installed the blade while the pulleys were stopped, checked the tension one more time, made sure all the safety guards were in place. Carl positioned himself at the steam valve controls while I stood at the feed mechanism. We'd set up emergency stop ropes at 3 locations, any of which would dump the steam pressure and kill the engine immediately. We'd gone over the safety procedures 5 times. We'd tested everything we could test without actually cutting wood. "Ready?" Carl asked. "Ready." He opened the steam valve gradually. The engine built speed slowly, the blade coming up to operational velocity over 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. The sound filled the mill shed, a high-pitched singing that made my teeth ache. The blade was a blur of motion, 60 inches of steel moving so fast it looked solid, like a circular disc instead of a flexible loop. Feed the log. I'd chosen a small ponderosa pine for the first test, 12 inches in diameter, straight grain, no visible knots. I engaged the feed mechanism, and the log started moving toward the blade at a measured pace. The first contact between wood and steel came with a scream that made my whole body tense. Sawdust erupted in a golden spray. The blade bit deep and kept going, cutting through that pine like it was butter. The log came out the other side in 2 clean pieces, perfect cut, no wobble, no binding. The blade kept singing its high note, unchanged by the work it had just done. Carl shut down the steam and we both stood there in the sudden silence, looking at that cut lumber like it was something miraculous. He walked over, ran his hand along the cut surface. "Smooth as glass," he said. "No blade marks, no tear out. That's professional grade work, Jesse." We did 5 more test cuts that afternoon, each one perfect, each one proving the modifications worked exactly as I designed them. By the time we shut down at 6 o'clock, I had 6 pieces of milled lumber sitting in a neat stack, and my hands were shaking not from exertion but from the adrenaline of success. "Your daddy would be proud," Carl said quietly as we cleaned up. "This is what he was trying to do. You finished it for him." I couldn't speak, just nodded and kept wiping down the equipment with an oiled rag. September 7th was dedicated to production testing. The goal was to process enough lumber to verify the mill could maintain quality over extended operation. 100 board feet seemed like the right target, enough to prove sustainability without pushing so hard we risked equipment failure. I'd prepared a stack of logs the day before, 8 ponderosa pines ranging from 14 to 20 inches in diameter, all cut to manageable 16-foot lengths. Carl and I started work at 6 in the morning when the air still held the night's coolness, and the birds were just beginning their dawn arguments. The first log fed through smooth and clean. The second log revealed a knot cluster about halfway through, and I felt the blade hesitate for just a fraction of a second before cutting through. The modified system handled the resistance without issue, the governor maintaining steady steam pressure, the blade never wavering from true. Knots were the test of any sawmill. They were harder than the surrounding wood. Their grain ran perpendicular to the main trunk, and they could grab a blade and twist it if the system wasn't rigid enough. We processed logs 3 through 8 with increasing confidence. Carl supervised, but let me handle most of the operation, watching for mistakes or safety violations he didn't find. By noon, we'd milled 120 board feet of lumber, all of it stacked and measured and verified for quality. The average feed rate worked out to about 850 board feet per day if we maintained that pace, more than enough for the Forest Service contract. Carl inspected the lumber with the critical eye of someone who'd spent 30 years in the trade. Grade quality, he said, better than most commercial mills produce. You could sell this lumber for premium price. I sat on a stack of logs, exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. It works, Carl. It actually works. So far, he said. But working for a morning and working for a season are different things. Don't get overconfident. I won't. That's when we heard the truck engine. Different sound from our family vehicles, higher pitched, more aggressive. I walked to the mill shed door and saw Derek Whitmore's green F-250 pulling up the driveway. He wasn't alone. Two other kids from Glacier High sat in the truck with him, probably brought along as witnesses to whatever humiliation Derek had planned. He climbed out wearing new jeans and a button-up shirt that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. His friends followed, both of them bigger than me, both of them wearing the kind of smirks that said they expected entertainment. Derek walked straight toward the mill shed like he owned the place. Heard sawmill noise coming from over here. Thought your grandpa's mill was dead. I stepped into the doorway, blocking his path. Leave now. Or what? He looked past me, trying to see into the shed. That the old frick you got running. Does Grandpa know you're playing with his forbidden toy? It's none of your business. Get off our property. He laughed, looked back at his friends. Hear that? He's getting tough. The weird kid who can't even talk to people at school is acting like he's some kind of hard man. Something in the way he said it, the casual contempt, the assumption that he could say whatever he wanted without consequence, made something snap inside me. I thought about my father dying on this property while Derek's father probably celebrated winning a contract. I thought about Grandma crying in the kitchen. I thought about Derek's smug face saying we couldn't compete. My fist caught him on the jaw before I'd consciously decided to throw it. Not a great punch, not particularly hard, but surprising enough that Derek stumbled backward into his truck. His friend started forward, and Carl appeared in the mill shed doorway behind me. 6'2" of retired millwright who'd spent 3 decades working with men, a lot tougher than high school kids. Boys, Carl said quietly, time to go. Derek touched his lip, saw blood on his fingers. His face went through several expressions before settling on angry. You're going to regret that, Hartwell. My dad's going to hear about this. About the sawmill. About everything. He climbed back in his truck, reversed hard enough to spray gravel, and drove away fast. Carl put a hand on my shoulder. That was stupid. I know. Feel good, though. A little. That boy's father is going to cause trouble. You know that, right? I know. We got maybe 24 hours before this becomes a problem. What do you want to do? I looked at the lumber we'd milled, proof that the frick could do what I designed it to do. Finish it. Make sure everything's perfect. Then tell Grandpa the truth before someone else does. The rest of September 7th was dedicated to preparation. We cleaned the mill shed until it looked better than it had in 6 years. Every tool in its place, every surface wiped down, sawdust swept into neat piles. We stacked the milled lumber with precision, each board measured and marked with dimensions. We set up safety equipment in visible positions where it couldn't be missed. Emergency stop ropes, fire extinguishers, first aid kit, warning signs about blade speed and steam pressure. I wrote a detailed report in my best handwriting, documenting every modification I'd made, every safety improvement, every test result. I included my father's original plans and my own calculations showing how I'd refined them. I included Carl's verification that the work was professional grade. I included photographs of the process and the results. The goal was to show this wasn't reckless teenage rebellion. This was planned, methodical, professional work done with expert supervision. This was finishing what my father had started, doing it safely, proving it could be done. By 8 o'clock that evening, everything was ready. The mill shed looked like a showroom. The documentation was complete. The evidence of success was stacked in neat piles of premium lumber. All I needed now was for Grandpa to come home and see it, and somehow not kill me in the process. The phone rang at 8:30. I answered it expecting Rachel checking in again. "Jess, it was Rachel. Listen, change of plans. Mom's feeling a lot better. The doctor in Lewiston says she just needs to adjust her medication, nothing serious. So we're coming home tomorrow instead of Sunday." Tomorrow, September 8th, 3 days early. "That's great," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What time?" "We're leaving early. Probably be there around 2 in the afternoon. You okay holding down the fort one more night?" "Yeah, no problem. Love you, little brother." "Love you too." I hung up and stood there with my hand still on the phone. 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. 16 hours. I'd thought I had until Sunday to mentally prepare for the confrontation, to rehearse what I'd say, to steel myself for Grandpa's reaction. Carl found me standing there. "What's wrong?" "They're coming home tomorrow afternoon." He was quiet for a moment. "Well, at least you won't have to wait long to find out what happens." "What do I do?" "Same thing you've been doing. Tell the truth. Show him what you've accomplished. Accept the consequences." "What if he never forgives me?" "Then you deal with that. But Jesse, listen. What you did here, modifying this equipment, taking this risk, that took courage. Maybe not the smartest kind of courage, but courage nonetheless. Your grandpa will see that eventually. Might take him some time, but he'll see it." "You think so?" "I think you're more like your father than Owen wants to admit, and I think that scares him more than anything." That night I barely slept. Lay in bed running through possible conversations, possible reactions, possible outcomes. Around 2 in the morning I got up and wrote a letter. "Grandpa, I know what I did was wrong. I know I broke your trust. I know I touched the machine you forbade anyone to go near, but I had to try. We're losing the ranch and I couldn't watch that happen without doing something. The frick works. It's safe. I made it better than it was, safer than Dad had it. I have proof. Please look at the evidence before you decide I'm just a reckless kid who doesn't understand consequences. I understand them completely. I'm willing to accept whatever punishment you think is appropriate. But please, please look at what I built before you condemn it. I did this because I love you, because I love this place, because I wanted to finish what Dad started and prove it could be done right. If you can't forgive me, I understand. But I hope you can at least see that I tried to do something good, even if I did it the wrong way. Jesse." I sealed the letter in an envelope, left it on the kitchen table where Grandpa would find it. September 8th arrived too fast. I spent the morning doing normal chores with hands that shook. Fed the chickens, checked the fence lines, tried to eat breakfast and couldn't get anything down past the knot in my throat. At noon, I gave up pretending I could do anything productive and just sat on the porch watching the road. Carl stopped by at 1 o'clock, just wanted to check on you. You doing okay? Not really. Want me to be here when they arrive? Might help to have someone who can vouch for the work you did. I thought about it. No, this is between me and my family, but thank you for everything. He shook my hand. You did good work, Jesse. Remember that. Whatever happens next, you did good work. At 2:15, I saw the dust rising from the road, the telltale sign of a vehicle approaching. Grandpa's truck appeared around the bend, moving at his usual steady pace. Not fast, not slow, just methodical. The truck pulled into the driveway, parked near the house. The engine shut off. I stood up from the porch steps. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Grandpa got out first, moving stiff from long hours driving. Grandma next, holding her purse and a bag from some store in Lewiston. Rachel last, stretching and yawning. They saw me standing there, and something in my face must have given it away because Grandpa stopped moving. His expression shifted from tired to alert. "Jesse, what happened?" "I need to show you something. In the mill shed." Grandma's hand went to her mouth. Rachel's eyes went wide. They followed me across the yard in silence. Nobody spoke. The only sound was our footsteps on gravel and the afternoon wind moving through the pines. I opened the mill shed door and stood aside. Grandpa walked in slowly. His eyes went to the frick first, seeing it changed. The new blade gleaming, the modified pulleys, the adjusted governor, the steam boiler showing signs of recent use. Then his eyes moved to the stack of milled lumber in the corner. Perfect cuts, professional quality, proof. He walked over to the sawmill like a man approaching something he thought was dead but had somehow come back to life. Put his hand on the blade guide, felt the new metal, the precise engineering. His other hand went to his shirt pocket, pulled out something small. My father's journal, the one I'd left in the mill shed by accident, too rushed and panicked yesterday to remember putting it down. When Grandpa looked at me, his eyes were wet. You knew what Jasper tried to do." "Yes, sir, I found his journal in the attic. I read what happened." "And you did it anyway." "I learned from his mistakes, did it differently, did it with help." Grandpa walked around the sawmill slowly, inspecting every change I'd made. His hands trembled when he touched the welds, traced the new belt paths, examined the modified mounting brackets. "This equipment is all we have," he said finally. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "You understand that? Without it, we lose everything." "I know." "Then why would you risk it?" The answer burst out of me louder than I intended. "Because we're losing everything anyway. We owe money we can't pay. Grandma needs medicine we can barely afford. If we keep doing what we've always done, we fail. At least this way there's a chance." Grandpa turned away from me, put both hands on the sawmill's frame, leaned his weight against it. His shoulders shook. I realized with shock that he was crying, and I'd never seen Grandpa Owen cry. Not when Grandma got her diagnosis. Not at the funerals I could remember. Not ever. But he was crying now, and I didn't know what to do except stand there and feel like the worst grandson in Montana. "I lost your father to this machine." The words came out broken, separated by gasps for air that sounded like drowning. "Your father. He was so confident, so sure he could improve it. I told him to leave it alone. He didn't listen." Grandpa straightened up, wiped his face with his sleeve, but the tears kept coming. He turned to look at me, and his eyes held something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment. Something deeper and more complicated that looked like fear mixed with grief, mixed with a kind of desperate hope. "The accident wasn't random, Jesse." He stopped, tried to collect himself. "Thomas was working on the sawmill while it was running. Thought he could adjust the governor spring pressure on the fly, dial it in while the blade was moving. I told him it was too dangerous. He said he knew what he was doing. Said he'd done it 100 times on smaller equipment." Grandpa walked over to the workbench, picked up one of the old parts I'd removed. The steam pressure spiked. I was in the house, heard the engine change pitch. By the time I got to the shed, the blade had shattered. Peace went through his chest. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. He was still breathing when I got there. Took him 4 minutes to die. He looked at me and tried to say something. I think it was sorry. Then he was gone. The mill shed felt too small suddenly, like the walls were pressing in. Rachel had her hand over her mouth. Grandma stood frozen in the doorway, tears running down her face. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stand there while the full weight of what my father's death had meant crashed down on all of us. I couldn't save him, Grandpa continued. Couldn't do anything but hold him while he bled out on this floor. And now you've touched this machine. Do you have any idea what that did to me? Coming home, seeing it running. For a second I thought I'd lost you too. Grandpa, I'm so sorry. The words felt inadequate, too small for what they needed to carry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it happened like that. Now you do. Now you know why I can't lose you. You're all I have left of Tom. If that machine killed you, I couldn't survive that. I couldn't. We stood there in silence, broken only by the sound of Grandpa trying to breathe normally and failing. The afternoon light coming through the mill shed's gaps had turned golden, evening approaching, the day sliding toward darkness. Margaret moved first. She stepped fully into the shed, her presence somehow making the space feel less crushing despite everything. Owen, that's enough. Her voice was gentle but firm. Jesse is not Thomas. He didn't work on a running engine. He spent weeks preparing. He learned proper techniques from Carl Winston. He took photographs. He documented everything. He had a plan. But he lied to us, Grandpa said, worked behind our backs. Yes, he did. And that was wrong. Grandma turned to look at me and her expression carried disappointment that hurt more than anger would have. Very wrong. Trust is sacred in this family, Jesse, and you broke it. I know, I'm sorry. She looked back at Grandpa, but lying about the project doesn't mean the project itself was foolish. Our grandson isn't reckless. He's desperate. And maybe we should have been listening when that desperation started showing. I wasn't desperate, I said. I just wanted to help. By putting yourself at risk. Grandma's voice carried an edge now. By gambling with our livelihood without asking permission. By working in secret on equipment that killed your father. The words stung because they were true. I had gambled, had risked everything on my own judgment, had assumed I knew better than the adults who'd actually lived through the tragedy. What's done is done, Grandma said after a moment. The sawmill is modified. Now we need to know if it actually works safely over time. Owen, you need to test it properly. Not just look at lumber Jesse cut yesterday. Really test it. Grandpa looked at her like she'd suggested walking off a cliff. Test it. Unless you want Jesse's work to be meaningless. She moved closer, stood between Grandpa and me like a referee. He spent weeks learning, weeks preparing, weeks building this. The least you can do is see if it actually works before you condemn it. And if it doesn't, if something goes wrong, then we stop immediately. But Owen, look at what he's accomplished. Grandma gestured at the milled lumber, the modified equipment, the documentation I'd prepared. This is professional work. Carl Winston supervised it. Our grandson did this right, even if he did it without permission. Grandpa stared at the sawmill for what felt like hours but was probably only a minute. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite spit out. Finally, he nodded once, short and sharp. All right, we'll test it. But if anything is wrong, anything at all, we shut down immediately. No discussion. He looked at me and his eyes were still wet. Get in. We're going to the North Timber Stand. My stomach dropped. The North Stand was where we kept our hardest wood. Old-growth Douglas fir with grains so dense it could dull a blade in an hour. It was the ultimate test of any sawmill. If the frick could handle that timber, it could handle anything. We walked across the property in silence. Grandpa drove the tractor with the frick hitched behind. I rode on the fender. Grandma and Rachel followed in Grandpa's truck. The evening air had cooled to that perfect Montana temperature where you could feel autumn waiting just beyond summer's edge. The forest smelled like pine sap and dry needles and earth that had baked all day in September sun. The north stand stood at the highest point of our property, where the land tilted up toward mountains that looked close enough to touch but were actually 10 miles distant. The Douglas firs here were 60, 70, 80 years old, thick-trunked and straight-grained, the kind of timber that built houses that lasted generations. Grandpa had already marked trees for harvest, red paint blazes on trunks selected for size and quality. He pointed at one, a 70-footer with a trunk diameter pushing 30 inches. That one. If your modifications work, they'll work on that. We spent an hour getting everything set up. Felled the tree with a chainsaw, limbed it, cut it to a manageable 16-foot length. Got it positioned on the sawmill carriage. Checked the blade tension one more time. Fired up the steam boiler and waited for pressure to build. The whole time Grandpa watched without speaking, his face unreadable. When everything was ready, he looked at me. You operate, I supervise. Anything feels wrong, you stop. Understood? Yes, sir. I engaged the feed mechanism. The big Douglas fir log started moving toward the blade. The first contact came with a sound like tearing fabric amplified 1,000 times. Sawdust exploded in a cloud that caught the evening light and turned it amber. The blade bit deep into wood that had been growing when my grandfather was born. For 10 minutes everything was perfect. The blade cut smooth and steady. The steam governor maintained pressure without fluctuation. The modified pulley system handled the load without strain. The log became lumber, heavy slabs of tight-grained Douglas fir that would sell for premium price. Then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Tick, tick, tick in the rhythm of the blade rotation. Subtle enough that I almost missed it under the general noise of operation, but definitely there. Something not quite right. I killed the engine immediately. The blade coasted down to silence. Grandpa was beside me instantly. What's that noise? I don't know. Started about 30 seconds ago. He listened, but with the engine off there was nothing to hear. We checked every component we could see. Belts looked good. Bearings showed no signs of overheating. Blade tension still perfect. But something was making that ticking sound and we couldn't identify it. Could be nothing, Grandpa said finally. Could be something working itself loose. Won't know without tearing it down to inspect. We don't have time for that, I said. No, we don't. He looked at the half-finished log, at the lumber we'd already cut, at the sawmill sitting there like a question with no good answer. So what do we do? Grandma spoke up from where she'd been watching. We go home, we eat dinner, we sleep on it. Tomorrow we decide with clear heads. The ride back to the cabin felt longer than the ride out. Nobody spoke. The ticking sound haunted me. It could be nothing. It could be everything. There was no way to know without more testing or a complete inspection, and we didn't have time for either. Dinner was pot roast Grandma had prepared before they left for Lewiston, reheated and served with carrots and potatoes and bread. We ate at the kitchen table in silence. The food tasted like sawdust in my mouth. I couldn't stop thinking about that sound, about what it might mean, about whether I'd destroyed our only chance at saving the ranch. After dinner, Grandpa disappeared to the barn. Rachel helped Grandma clean up. I sat on the porch steps watching the sun set behind the western mountains, turning the sky purple and orange and finally dark blue as the stars came out. The barn door opened around 9 o'clock. Grandpa's silhouette appeared in the doorway, backlit by the single bulb he kept burning in there. He stood looking in my direction for a moment, then started walking over. He sat on the porch step beside me without speaking. We stayed like that for maybe 5 minutes, just sitting in the dark, listening to crickets and the occasional rustle of wind through the pines. "Your father stood right here," Grandpa finally said, "night before he died, showed me his plans for modifying the frick, said he could increase production by 40% if I just trust him. I told him to leave it alone. He said I didn't trust his judgment. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed quiet. I found him the next day." He paused, and I could hear him working to keep his voice steady. "I've gone over that morning 1,000 times in my head. If I'd gone to the mill shed 5 minutes earlier, if I'd checked on him when I first heard the engine sound change, if I'd been more supportive of his ideas instead of shooting them down, maybe he wouldn't have felt like he had to prove himself. Maybe he would have asked for help instead of working alone." "It wasn't your fault, Grandpa." "Maybe not, but I couldn't save him. And now you're doing the same thing he did, taking the same risks, pushing the same boundaries. For a second there, seeing you at that sawmill, I felt like I was watching Tom all over again. Like history was trying to repeat itself and I was powerless to stop it." He turned to look at me, and even in the darkness I could see tears on his face. "I can't lose you too, Jesse. I can't. You're all I have left of him." "You won't lose me. I promise I'll be careful." Tom promised me that too, day before he died. His voice broke completely. "Then he was gone, and I had to bury my son and explain to you why your daddy wasn't coming home and pretend like I was strong enough to hold this family together when I felt like I was dying inside." We sat there while Grandpa cried, and I didn't know what to do except put my hand on his shoulder and let him know he wasn't alone. After a while he got himself under control, wiped his face with his sleeve, took a shaky breath. "If we're going to do this, if we're going to use that sawmill, I need you to promise me something." "Anything." "Complete honesty. You tell me everything you're planning every step of the way. No more secrets. No more working behind my back. And if something feels wrong, even a little wrong, you stop immediately and we figure it out together. Can you promise me that?" "I promise." We shook hands. His hand trembled, but his grip was strong. The barn door opened again and Grandma stepped out. "I heard raised voices," she said. "Everyone all right?" "We're talking," Grandpa said, "just talking." She came over and sat on Grandpa's other side. The three of us on the porch steps, Montana night spreading out around us in darkness and stars. After a moment, Rachel joined us too, sitting beside me. The whole family together in silence that felt less heavy than before. "I need to tell you something," Grandma said after a while. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Something I should have said years ago but was too afraid." She took a breath, and when she spoke again there was steel underneath the gentleness. "Your father's death wasn't an accident, Jesse. The blade didn't shatter because of his modifications. It shattered because it was sabotaged." The world seemed to stop. "What?" "After Tom died, I collected pieces of the blade, took them to a metallurgist in Kalispell, paid him to analyze them confidentially." She reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a folded paper. "This is his report. The blade had been filed partway through, deliberately weakened. Under stress, it shattered exactly where someone had compromised it." My hands shook as I took the paper. Even in the porch light I could read the metallurgist's conclusions. Evidence of mechanical filing. Stress fracture initiated at point of maximum weakening, consistent with deliberate sabotage. "Who would do that?" My voice came out barely above a whisper. "We don't know for certain," Grandpa said. "Had our suspicions. Whitmore Timber wanted the contracts we had that year. $15,000 worth of work. After Tom died, those contracts went to them. Sheriff investigated, found nothing. Could have been business competition, could have been someone with a grudge. No witnesses, no proof beyond that filed blade." "Why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you fight this?" Grandma's voice cracked. Because I was terrified. Tom was dead and the investigation was going nowhere, and the Whitmore family had influence everywhere. Samuel Whitmore sat on the bank board, on the county commission, had friends in the sheriff's office. If I pushed too hard, if I made accusations I couldn't prove, I was afraid they might come after you next. She looked at me with tears streaming down her face. I chose to protect the living instead of getting justice for the dead. Maybe that was wrong, but it was all I could think to do. I sat there holding that metallurgist report, understanding for the first time that my father hadn't died from his own mistakes. Someone had murdered him. Someone had deliberately weakened that blade knowing it would fail, knowing it would kill whoever was operating the mill when it shattered. That's why I shut down the Frick, Grandpa said. Not just because it killed Tom, but because I couldn't trust anyone. Couldn't risk you growing up around that equipment, learning to operate it, giving whoever murdered your father another target. I thought if I kept it silent and forbidden, I could keep you safe. But now I've rebuilt it, I said. Now I've proven it works, if the same people who killed Dad find out. They already know, Rachel said quietly. Derek Whitmore saw you operating it yesterday, heard the mill running. He'll tell his father. The implications settled over us like ice water. If Samuel Whitmore had sabotaged the Frick once to eliminate competition, he might do it again. And this time I'd be the target instead of my father. We should go to the sheriff, I said. With what evidence? Grandpa asked. A metallurgist report from 6 years ago that we hid instead of presenting at the time. A filed blade that's been sitting in a box in our attic. They'd say we're making excuses, trying to deflect blame from Tom's operator error. Then what do we do? Grandma spoke up, her voice strong despite the tears. We finish that Forest Service contract. We prove the Frick works safely and reliably. We save this ranch. And we do it before anyone has a chance to stop us. But if something happens, if they try to sabotage it again, then we're ready for it this time. Grandpa stood up, his decision made. We install security, lights around the mill shed, locks on the doors, someone always watching when we're not working. We don't let that sawmill out of our sight until we're done. Owen, this is dangerous, Grandma said. So is losing the ranch. So is giving up everything Tom died for. He looked at me. Jesse proved that sawmill can work, proved his father's ideas were sound. I'm not going to let fear keep us from finishing what they started. We called Carl Winston the next morning, told him everything. The sabotage, the threats, the decision to move forward anyway. He listened without interrupting, and when we finished he was quiet for a long moment. You're asking me to help you do something dangerous, he finally said. Yes, Grandpa replied. And you understand that if Whitmore Timber tries anything, we could all be at risk. We understand. Another pause. When do we start? Tomorrow. We need the contract signed and filed with the Forest Service first. Make it official. Hard to sabotage a project that's already got government documentation. The next day, September 10th, Grandpa drove to the Forest Service office and submitted our bid. 40,000 board feet, 8-week delivery, $5,800. The contract officer looked surprised. Didn't think you folks had the equipment for this size job, he said. We have equipment. Grandpa signed the paperwork with firm strokes, and we have the expertise. You'll get quality lumber on schedule. The contract was signed and filed by noon. We were committed, no backing out now. That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Derek Whitmore's green truck pulled up the driveway around 2 o'clock. But this time Derek was alone and he wasn't smiling. He climbed out slowly, and even from a distance I could see his face was bruised. Split lip, blackened eye, the kind of damage that spoke of recent violence. Grandpa and I met him in the yard. Carl was in the mill shed, close enough to intervene if needed. Derek stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking younger than 17, looking scared. "My dad knows about the sawmill," he said without preamble. "About you taking the Forest Service contract. He's angry, really angry." "How angry?" Grandpa asked. "Angry enough to hit me when I said maybe you deserved a fair chance at the work." Derek touched his split lip carefully. "Angry enough to make phone calls last night. Late meetings with people I don't know. Same pattern as before big business moves." "Before big business moves," I said. "You mean like in 1961? Derek went pale. "I don't know what happened in 1961. I was 7 years old. But I know my dad celebrates April 12th every year with whiskey and says something about a problem that stayed solved." He looked at me directly. "April 12th is when your father died." The confirmation hit like a physical blow. Samuel Whitmore had murdered my father and celebrated the anniversary. "Why are you telling us this?" Grandpa's voice was hard. "Because I'm tired of being ashamed of my name." Derek's voice shook, but he kept talking. "I'm tired of winning because my father cheats. I'm tired of pretending I don't know what kind of man he is." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "These are photocopies from his office files. September 1961. Payment to someone with initials JM for equipment maintenance. $500. April 14th, same year, same amount, same initials. 2 days after your son died." Grandpa took the papers, studied them. "Who's JM?" "Jake Morrison," Derek said. "Used to work sawmill crew for us. Got fired in 1963 for drinking. Lives in a trailer outside Kalispell now." We sat with that information for a moment. Proof that Samuel Whitmore had paid someone right before and right after my father's death. Not enough for court maybe, but enough to know the truth. "What do you want from us?" I asked. Derek looked at the mill shed, at the frick visible through the open door. "Teach me to run that sawmill. Let me help you finish the contract. I'll work for free. I just want to learn honest work from honest people." Grandpa and I exchanged glances. This was the son of the man who'd murdered my father, asking to work beside us, offering to betray his own family. "Why should we trust you?" Grandpa asked. "You shouldn't." Derek's honesty was disarming. "I'm a Whitmore. My family's been destroying yours for years, but I can't change who my father is. I can only choose who I'm going to be, and I'm choosing not to be him." Grandpa studied Derek for a long moment. "If we agree to this, there are conditions. You work under supervision every minute. You follow safety protocols exactly. You tell us immediately if your father tries anything. And if you betray us, you answer to me personally." "I understand." They shook hands. I watched, still not sure this was a good idea, but willing to trust Grandpa's judgment. Carl came out of the mill shed. "So we're training the enemy now." "We're training someone who wants to learn," Grandpa said. "Difference matters." For the next 5 days we prepared. Derek showed up every morning at 6, worked until dark, learning everything we could teach him. Carl supervised, patient but demanding. No shortcuts, no assumptions. If Derek made a mistake, Carl made him do it over until it was right. The transformation was remarkable. Derek arrived the first day in new jeans and a clean shirt. By day 3, he looked like he'd been working timber his whole life. Sawdust in his hair, grease on his hands, muscles developing where soft living had left him weak. He didn't complain, didn't ask for breaks, just worked and learned and slowly earned our respect through sweat and attention. Grandpa watched it happen with eyes that saw something I didn't. One evening after Derek had gone home, Grandpa sat on the porch cleaning his tools. "He reminds me of someone," Grandpa said. "Who?" "Sam Whitmore, before the money corrupted him. We were friends once. Sam and I worked together on a railroad crew right after the war. He was honest then, hard-working, loyal. Then he inherited his father's timber business and something changed. The money got between who he was and who he wanted to be. You think Derek can be different? I think Derek's choosing to be different. That takes courage most men never find. On September 15th, the night before we planned to start production, Derek stayed late. We'd installed motion sensor lights around the mill shed, heavy-duty locks on all the doors, and Carl had moved his camping trailer onto our property so he could sleep within earshot of the equipment. "My father knows I'm helping you," Derek said as we locked up for the night. "He's disowned me, told me not to come home." "Where are you staying?" "My truck mostly. Sometimes the truck stop in Kalispell." Grandpa overheard. "You can use our guest room. It's small, but it's better than sleeping in a truck." "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering. We take care of the people who work here." Derek's eyes got wet. "Thank you, sir." That night I couldn't sleep. Lay in bed listening to the house settle, to Derek moving around in the guest room down the hall, to Grandpa's quiet footsteps as he made his hourly check of the mill shed. Around 2 in the morning I heard a sound that didn't belong. An engine, not ours. I got out of bed, looked out the window. Headlights near the mill shed. 2 vehicles, lights off, only visible because of the moonlight reflecting off chrome. 2 figures moving in the darkness, carrying something. I ran to Grandpa's room, shook him awake. "Someone's at the mill." He was up instantly, grabbed the rifle he kept beside the bed. We ran through the house, Derek joining us from the guest room, all 3 of us heading for the door. The headlights fled as we emerged. Engines roared to life, tires spun gravel, and the vehicles disappeared down the driveway faster than we could follow. We reached the mill shed breathing hard, hearts pounding. The door hung open. Inside, the smell hit us first. Gasoline, strong enough to make my eyes water. A 5-gallon can sat on the floor, half empty. Gasoline soaked the sawdust around the Frick's base, puddled around the lumber stacks, wet the floor near the steam boiler. On the workbench, placed deliberately where we'd see it, sat a book of matches. Unused. They'd fled before lighting it. Grandpa stood there staring at the near disaster. 30 more seconds and everything would have burned. The sawmill, the lumber, the mill shed, possibly the forest beyond if the fire spread. "They tried to burn it," he said, voice shaking, "just like before, history repeating." Derek picked up the matchbook. His hands trembled. "I'm sorry. This is because of me, because I'm helping you. This is because your father is willing to commit arson to protect his business," Grandpa said. "That's on him, not you." "We call the sheriff," I said. "And tell him what?" Grandpa's voice was bitter. "That someone almost burned our mill shed but didn't. That we smell gasoline but have no proof who put it there. Same as 1961. Same as always. They'll investigate, find nothing. Life goes on." "So what do we do?" Grandpa looked at the gasoline-soaked floor, at the sawmill we'd worked so hard to restore, at the evidence of how far someone would go to stop us. His jaw set in that way that meant a decision had been made. "We finish that contract. We work in shifts so someone's always here. We don't sleep. We don't rest. We mill that 40,000 board feet and we deliver it to the Forest Service, and we prove that intimidation doesn't work on this family." He looked at Derek. "You still want to help after this?" "More than ever," Derek said. "Someone needs to stand up to my father. Might as well be his own son." Carl appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand. "Heard vehicles. Everyone okay?" "Someone tried to burn us out," Grandpa said. "Didn't succeed." Carl surveyed the damage. "They'll try again." I know, that's why we're not giving them another chance. We start production tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., 3 shifts, round-the-clock operation. Someone always watching. We work until we're done or until they stop us, whichever comes first. That's a war you're declaring, Carl said. Then it's a war we'll fight. Grandpa turned to face all of us. My son died to competition that played dirty. I let fear keep me from fighting back then. I'm not making that mistake again. The night air smelled like gasoline and determination. Tomorrow would bring consequences we couldn't predict. But standing there in the mill shed with sawdust and spilled fuel marking the ground where someone had tried to destroy everything we'd built, I understood something important. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't avoiding danger. It's facing it head-on with people you trust beside you. Tomorrow we'd find out if courage was enough. September 16th dawned cold and clear, the kind of Montana morning where frost painted the grass silver and your breath came out in clouds. I stood in the mill shed at 5:30 watching the steam boiler build pressure, listening to the hiss and pop of water turning to vapor, feeling the weight of what we were about to attempt settle onto my shoulders like physical mass. 3 shifts, round-the-clock operation. Owen from 6 in the morning until noon, Derek from noon until 6 in the evening, me from 6 until midnight. Carl supervising all 3 shifts, sleeping in snatches between, ready to step in if anyone faltered. 18 hours of daily production until we hit 40,000 board feet or collapsed trying. The math was brutal but simple. 8 weeks to deliver. We'd already lost 2 weeks to preparation and modification. 6 weeks remained. 40,000 board feet divided by 42 days meant 950 feet per day minimum. No room for error. No days off for weather or equipment failure or human exhaustion. Just constant forward motion or failure. Grandpa arrived at the mill shed carrying 2 thermoses of coffee and a determination that showed in every line of his face. He'd been up since 4 preparing, checking equipment, making sure everything was ready. At 68 years old, he was about to work a 6-hour shift operating equipment that demanded total concentration and physical stamina. I watched him move around the frick like a man visiting an old friend he'd abandoned for too long. "You ready for this?" I asked. He poured coffee into a tin cup, took a long drink, looked at me over the rim. "Been ready for 6 years. Just took me this long to admit it." The first log was a 22-foot ponderosa pine, 26 inches in diameter, straight grain with minimal knots. Grandpa positioned it on the carriage with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this thousands of times. He engaged the feed mechanism, and the log started moving toward the blade. The sound when steel met wood was like a song I'd forgotten I knew. The frick sang its high-pitched note, and sawdust erupted in golden clouds that caught the early morning light streaming through the mill shed's gaps. For the first hour I just watched the way Grandpa's hands moved with absolute certainty, watched how he read the wood grain with a glance and adjusted feed rate accordingly, watched him work with a smoothness that came from decades of experience distilled into pure competence. This was what mastery looked like. Not flashy, not dramatic, just steady, reliable, professional work that made difficult tasks appear effortless. By 9 o'clock, he'd processed 6 logs into lumber that would make any commercial mill jealous. The cuts were glass smooth. The dimensions were precise to within a 1/16 of an inch. The waste was minimal. He worked without wasted motion, every action purposeful, the kind of efficiency that can only come from truly understanding your craft. Carl brought fresh coffee at 10. "How's it feel being back at it?" Grandpa wiped sawdust from his face, took the offered cup. "Like I forgot how much I loved this work. Forgot what it felt like to create something useful with your hands. Been too long." "You're milling at about 1,200 feet per day pace," Carl said. "Keep this up and you'll hit quota easy." If we can maintain it. Grandpa looked at the stack of logs waiting to be processed. That's a big if. At 11:30, Rachel appeared with sandwiches and news. Sheriff came by. Wants to talk about last night. What did you tell him? That we'd talk after lunch. She handed out food wrapped in wax paper. Mom's with him now, showing him the gasoline stains. He's taking pictures but says without witnesses or evidence of who did it, there's not much he can do. Same story as always, Grandpa said. He took a bite of sandwich, chewed thoughtfully. Doesn't matter. We're not stopping for investigations that won't go anywhere. Derek arrived at 11:45, early for his noon shift. He'd brought his own lunch in a paper sack and looked nervous. First day actually operating solo, even with Carl supervising. First day proving whether the past week of training had prepared him for real work. Grandpa spent 15 minutes going over everything one more time. Steam pressure here. Feed rate controlled with this lever. Emergency stops in 3 locations. Any vibration, any unusual sound, any feeling that something's wrong, you shut down immediately. Understood? Yes, sir. Grandpa looked at him for a long moment. You're doing good work, Derek. Your father may not appreciate that, but I do. Derek's eyes got wet, but he nodded without speaking. The shift change happened at noon exactly. Grandpa shut down the mill, checked every component, made notes about blade tension and steam pressure for Derek's reference. Then he walked out without looking back, moving like a man who'd put in an honest morning's work and earned his rest. Derek's first cut was cautious to the point of slow. He fed the log so carefully that it took twice as long as necessary. But the cut was clean and the lumber was good and he didn't make any mistakes. By his third log he'd found a rhythm, still slower than Grandpa but improving with each pass. I stayed for the first hour of Derek's shift, watching from the side, ready to step in if needed. But he didn't need me. He worked with the careful attention of someone who knew he was being tested and was determined to pass. Carl supervised with the critical eye of someone who'd seen every possible mistake and was watching for signs of the common ones. Around 2 o'clock I left them to it and went to help Rachel with afternoon chores. Feeding the animals, checking fence lines, the normal ranch work that didn't stop just because we were running a sawmill operation. The physical labor felt good after hours of standing and watching. My body needed to move, needed to burn off the nervous energy that had been building since we'd found the gasoline. The sheriff was still at the house when we got back. Young guy, maybe 30, newer to the job and seemingly more interested in actually investigating than the old sheriff had been. He took our statements about the attempted arson, photographed the gasoline stains, collected the empty gas can as evidence. "I'll be honest with you folks," he said when he finished. "Without witnesses or physical evidence connecting this to anyone specific, prosecution is going to be nearly impossible. But I'll file the report and increase patrols in this area." "We appreciate that," Grandma said. "Even if nothing comes of it, at least there's a record." After the sheriff left, Grandma sat at the kitchen table with her ledger open. She was tracking production numbers, calculating board feet against time remaining, running the math that would tell us if we were on track or falling behind. "How are we doing?" I asked. She tapped her pencil against the page. "If Owen can maintain that pace and Derek can get up to speed and you can match Owen's numbers on the night shift, we'll make it with days to spare. But that's a lot of ifs." "We'll make it." She looked at me over her reading glasses. "You sound certain." "I am. We didn't come this far to fail now." My shift started at 6 with the sun dropping toward the western mountains and the September evening turning the light golden. Derek had processed 7 logs in his 6 hours, about 800 board feet. Not quite up to quota, but respectable for his first solo shift. He looked exhausted, covered in sawdust, hands trembling slightly from gripping controls for 6 hours straight. "You did good," I told him as we changed over. Felt like I was moving through mud. Everything took so long. "You'll get faster. First shift is always hard." Carl handed me a cup of coffee. "You ready for 6 hours?" "Ready as I'll be." The night shift had a different quality than day work. The mill shed lights created islands of illumination in darkness. The forest beyond the walls became invisible, just a presence you felt rather than saw. The sounds changed too. Without daylight distractions, every mechanical noise seemed amplified. The blades' singing note, the steam engine's rhythmic breathing, the crack and pop of wood surrendering to steel. I worked through the evening finding my own rhythm. Slower than Grandpa, faster than Derek, somewhere in between experience and youth. By 9 o'clock I'd processed 5 logs and was feeling the burn in my shoulders from maintaining constant attention. By 10, my eyes were dry from sawdust and concentration. By 11, I was operating on coffee and determination. The accident happened at 11:30. I was processing my 9th log, a big Douglas fir that had a hidden knot cluster deep in its core. The blade hit that cluster and I felt the vibration through the feed controls. Should have stopped immediately. That was the rule. Any vibration, any hesitation, shut down and inspect. But I was so close to finishing the log, just 3 more feet, and I thought I could push through. The vibration increased. The blade started pulling to one side. I corrected, overcorrected, and suddenly the log was binding in a way that put sideways pressure on the blade. The whole carriage lurched. I yanked the feed control back, but momentum had other ideas. The log twisted, caught the blade at an angle, and the drive belt jumped its pulley. The belt whipped through the air like a snake made of leather and speed. I saw it coming, tried to move, wasn't fast enough. The belt caught my left forearm, not hard enough to break bone but hard enough to tear skin and leave a burn that felt like fire. Carl hit the emergency stop rope before I could even process what had happened. Steam pressure dumped. The blade coasted to silence. I stood there holding my arm, feeling blood running down to my wrist, seeing the torn sleeve of my father's shirt dark with red. "Let me see it," Carl said, already moving toward me with the first aid kit we kept mounted on the wall. "I'm okay, it's not that bad." "You're bleeding through your fingers, that's bad enough." He pulled my hand away gently, examined the wound with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen plenty of sawmill injuries. Long laceration but not deep. No arterial bleeding. You're lucky. 2 inches to the right and that belt would have caught your hand. Could have broken every bone. He cleaned the wound with water and antiseptic that burned worse than the original injury. Applied pressure until the bleeding slowed to a seep. Wrapped it in gauze and medical tape until my forearm looked like it was wearing a white glove. "You're done for tonight," he said when he finished. "That needs proper attention, might need stitches." "I can keep working." "No, you can't. You made a mistake, got hurt, and now you need to stop before you make a bigger mistake. That's how people die in sawmills, Jesse. They push through when they should stop." He was right and I knew it, but accepting it felt like failure. We need the production. We're already behind. We're not so far behind that it's worth you losing a hand. Go to the house. Get that looked at properly. Come back tomorrow if you're cleared for work. Rachel drove me to the emergency room in Kalispell. The doctor on duty was older, maybe 60, with hands that had clearly seen their share of manual labor. He examined my arm with professional detachment. "Sawmill?" he asked. "Yes, sir." He cleaned the wound more thoroughly than Carl had been able to. Used tweezers to remove bits of wood fiber I hadn't known were embedded in the torn skin. 10 stitches later and my arm was properly bandaged, throbbing but stable. "You're lucky," the doctor said. "I've seen what sawmill accidents can do when they go really wrong. This is nothing. Couple weeks and you'll be good as new." "Can I keep working?" "If you're careful, keep it clean and dry. Change the dressing daily. Any signs of infection, you come back immediately." He looked at me directly. "And whatever you were doing that caused this, don't do it again. Next time you might not be lucky." We got back to the ranch around 2 in the morning. The mill shed was dark, equipment shut down for the night. I found a note from Carl on the kitchen table. "Got in another hour after you left. 9 logs total for your shift, 890 board feet. Good work until the mistake. See you at 6. I lay in bed, unable to sleep, my arm throbbing despite the painkillers the doctor had given me. Kept replaying that moment when the belt whipped free. 2 inches to the right and I could have lost my hand. Could have ended up like my father, bleeding out on the mill shed floor while people who loved me tried to save me and failed. Grandpa appeared in my doorway around 3. "Saw your light still on. Can't sleep." He came in, sat on the edge of my bed like he used to when I was small and had nightmares. "Let me see the arm." I held it up. He examined the bandaging without touching it, seeing the blood that had seeped through in a few places. "You made a mistake," he said quietly. "Pushed when you should have stopped. Same mistake your father made. Same mistake I've made. Same mistake every sawyer makes eventually if they work long enough. I'm sorry. We needed the production and I thought I could finish the cut." "Production doesn't matter if you're dead." He put his hand on my good shoulder. "I'd rather lose the ranch than lose you. You understand that?" "Yes, sir." "Tomorrow you rest. Let Derek and me handle the shifts. Come back when you're healed enough to work safely." "But we'll fall behind." "Then we fall behind. We'll make it up or we won't, but we do it with you alive and whole." The next 3 days were hard. September 17th through 19th, I watched from the sidelines while others worked. Grandpa ran his morning shift with the same steady competence. Derek improved daily, his feed rate increasing as his confidence grew, his movements becoming more fluid and certain. They were managing about 1,600 board feet per day between them, below the ideal pace, but enough to keep us moving forward. Carl suggested bringing in another operator to cover my shift. I could teach someone the basics in a day or 2, fill in the gap. Grandpa considered it. "Who?" "There's a few retired sawyers in the area. Hank Morrison worked mills for 40 years. Could probably still run circles around all of us." "That's Jake Morrison's father," I said. "The man who sabotaged Dad's blade." Carl was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, it is. But Hank didn't do anything wrong, and holding his son's sins against him isn't fair." "You think he'd even help us?" "Only one way to find out." Grandpa drove to Hank Morrison's place that afternoon. The old man lived in a small house on the edge of Kalispell, keeping to himself mostly, retired from sawmill work after his son's scandal destroyed the family reputation. Grandpa was gone for 2 hours. When he came back, Hank Morrison was with him. Hank was 73 years old, white-haired and weathered, moving with the careful precision of someone whose body had been used hard and was now being preserved carefully. He looked at me with eyes that held shame and determination mixed together. "Your grandfather tells me you need help finishing a contract." "Yes, sir," I said. "We're behind pace and I'm out of commission for a few days." He nodded. "Also tells me you know about my boy, about what he did to your father." "I know. I didn't raise Jake to be what he became." His voice was rough with old grief. "Tried to teach him honest work and honest living. Somewhere along the way he chose a different path. I'm ashamed of that every day." You're not responsible for his choices, Grandpa said. Maybe not, but I can try to make amends. Hank looked at the mill shed at the frick visible through the open door. If you'll have me, I'll work your night shifts until the boy's healed. No pay necessary. Just let me help undo some of the damage my family caused yours. Grandpa and Hank shook hands. The old sawyer started that same evening, running the 6 to midnight shift with a smoothness that proved 40 years of experience wasn't something you forgot. He milled 1,000 feet his first night, matching Grandpa's pace despite being 5 years older. By September 22nd, my arm had healed enough for the doctor to clear me for light work. The stitches would stay in another week, but I could operate equipment if I was careful. I took back the night shift from Hank, though the old man volunteered to stay on and help however he could. The days started blending together. Wake at 5, help with morning chores, eat breakfast, sleep a few hours, wake at 4 in the afternoon, eat dinner, start shift at 6, work until midnight, sleep 4 hours, repeat. It was grinding, exhausting work that left no time for anything except sawmill operation and recovery. But the lumber kept piling up. The stack in the mill shed grew until we had to start storing finished boards outside under tarps. September became October, and the Montana weather turned colder. We worked through rain that turned the mill shed floor to mud, worked through early snow that dusted the logs and made them slippery, worked through exhaustion that made every movement feel like wading through deep water. The community started noticing. Word spread about what we were attempting, about the Whitmore threats, about the attempted arson. Support came in unexpected ways. The general store in Kalispell started giving us credit without asking when we'd pay. Mrs. Porter from the library brought food twice a week. Neighbors we barely knew stopped by with offers to help with ranch chores so we could focus on milling. One evening in early October, a truck pulled up with 5 men from the sawmill crew at Champion Timber, Carl's old employer. "We heard you needed help," their foreman said. "We're volunteering weekend shifts. No pay, just want to make sure you finish that contract." "Why?" Grandpa asked. "You don't owe us anything." "Carl Winston is one of ours," the foreman said. "And what the Whitmores are doing to you isn't right. Timber community takes care of its own." They worked Saturday and Sunday, October 7th and 8th, giving us 2 full days to rest and recover. Professional sawyers running the frick at maximum safe capacity, processing lumber so fast we could barely keep up with stacking it. By Sunday evening, they'd added 4,500 board feet to our total and left with handshakes and wishes for success. The Whitmore response escalated. October 10th brought a visit from the county building inspector, claiming someone had reported unsafe working conditions. He inspected everything, found nothing wrong, left frustrated. October 12th brought a fire marshal inspection based on an anonymous complaint about improper fuel storage. Again, everything checked out. Samuel Whitmore was throwing everything he had at us through official channels, trying to shut us down without getting his own hands dirty. But we'd prepared too well, documented everything, followed every regulation. There was nothing for inspectors to find. Derek received threatening letters at our address, his father's lawyers demanding he cease and desist working for competitors. He threw the letters away without reading past the first paragraph. "I'm not his son anymore," Derek said. "I'm choosing my own family." October 13th brought the breakthrough. We hit 35,000 board feet, 5,000 to go, 5 days until the deadline. The math had finally swung in our favor. We were going to make it. That night I worked my shift with a lightness I hadn't felt in weeks. The end was visible. The impossible goal was becoming possible. The lumber stacks told a story of what determination and community support could accomplish. Around 10 o'clock I heard vehicles approaching. Multiple engines, more than one truck. I shut down the mill, stepped outside to look. 3 trucks parked in our driveway, headlights cutting through October darkness. Men getting out, not threatening, just standing there. Carl appeared beside me, rifle ready. What do you think? Don't know yet. One of the men stepped forward into the light. It was the foreman from Champion Timber. Behind him were other sawmill workers. Some I recognized from the weekend help, others I'd never seen. We heard Samuel Whitmore's making noise about stopping you before you finish, the foreman said. Figured you might need some witnesses, people to make sure nothing happens in these last few days. He gestured at the men behind him. We're taking shifts. Someone will be here round the clock until you deliver that lumber to the Forest Service. Why are you doing this? I asked. Because sometimes you have to choose what kind of community you want to live in. The foreman's voice was firm. One where powerful people can destroy honest workers, or one where we stand together against that. We're choosing the second option. They set up a rotation. 2 men always present, watching the mill shed, making sure no one approached with bad intentions. The Whitmore family's reach was long, but it apparently didn't extend to intimidating a dozen witnesses from a competitor's crew. October 14th, we hit 38,000 feet. October 15th at 11 in the morning, Derek processed the final log. 40,217 board feet of premium milled lumber. Contract fulfilled with 6 hours to spare. We stood in the mill shed looking at the finished product, all of us exhausted beyond words, covered in sawdust and grease and the evidence of weeks of brutal labor. Grandpa, Derek, Carl, Hank Morrison, Rachel, Grandma, me, and the 2 Champion Timber workers who'd been on watch shift. Nobody spoke for a long moment. We just looked at what we'd built together. Proof that intimidation doesn't always win. Proof that community matters. Proof that impossible goals become possible when enough people care. Grandpa broke the silence. We deliver tomorrow morning. All of us. Load every board onto trucks and drive it to the Forest Service together. Make sure everyone sees we did this. That evening we had a celebration dinner. Grandma had cooked a roast that must have cost a week's grocery budget, brought out preserves she'd been saving, baked bread and pies. The dining room table overflowed with food and people. Hank Morrison sat next to Grandpa talking about old sawmill techniques. Derek helped Rachel serve, moving through the room like he'd always belonged here. Carl and the Champion workers traded stories about close calls and equipment failures that became funny in hindsight. I sat there taking it all in. This was family, not all related by blood, but all connected by choice and work and shared purpose. We'd built something bigger than lumber. We'd built proof that doing the right thing mattered. Later that night, I found Grandpa on the porch, same spot where he'd cried weeks earlier. He was drinking coffee, looking at stars through gaps in the clouds. "Thank you," I said, "for trusting me, for finishing what Dad started." "You finished it," he said. "I just helped." He looked at me and his eyes held something different than the fear I'd seen before. This was pride. You took an impossible situation and made it possible. That takes more than skill. It takes courage. I learned it from you. No, you taught me something I'd forgotten. That fear of losing people can make you lose them anyway by not letting them be who they need to be. I was so afraid of you dying like Tom that I almost killed who you were meant to become. He put his hand on my shoulder. Tom would be proud. I'm proud. We sat together in comfortable silence, watching Montana night deepen around us. Tomorrow we'd deliver the lumber. Tomorrow we'd prove we could compete. Tomorrow we'd save the ranch. But tonight we just sat, grandfather and grandson, connected by loss and work, and the understanding that sometimes the hardest things are the most worth doing. October 16th dawned with the kind of clarity that only comes after storms have washed the air clean. The sky stretched blue and endless above Montana, and the morning cold carried the promise of winter waiting just beyond autumn's last defense. We started loading trucks at 5 in the morning, working by the light of the mill shed and headlights from vehicles parked in a semicircle around the lumber stacks. 40,217 board feet of premium milled Douglas fir and ponderosa pine. It took 4 trucks to haul it all. Grandpa's old Ford, Derek's F-250, Carl's pickup, and a flatbed borrowed from Champion Timber. We loaded every board with care, stacking and securing with the same attention to detail we'd used in cutting it. This lumber represented more than wood. It represented weeks of brutal labor, community support, and refusing to be intimidated by people who thought power mattered more than right. The convoy left at 7:30. Grandpa drove the lead truck with me beside him. Derek followed with Rachel. Carl and Hank Morrison brought up the rear. Behind them came something unexpected. A dozen vehicles from the timber community. Sawyers and millwrights and forestry workers who'd heard what we were doing and decided to bear witness. We drove through Kalispell like a parade nobody had planned, and people stopped on sidewalks to watch us pass. The Forest Service office sat on the edge of town, a low building with green government paint and flags that hung limp in the still morning air. The contract officer, a man named Douglas Fletcher who'd worked timber procurement for 20 years, came out when he saw the convoy arriving. His expression suggested he hadn't really believed we'd fulfill the contract. 40,000 board feet as agreed, Grandpa said, climbing down from his truck. Grade equality, milled to spec, ready for your inspection. Fletcher walked along the trucks, examining lumber, pulling random boards to check dimensions, running his hands over cut surfaces to verify quality. He worked with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen contractors try to pass off inferior work too many times to take anything on trust. After 30 minutes he straightened up, made notes on his clipboard, looked at Grandpa with something like respect. This is exceptional work, better quality than most commercial mills produce. Every board is within tolerance. The cuts are clean. The dimensions are precise. He paused. I'll be honest, Mr. Hartwell. When you took this contract I had doubts. Thought maybe you were overreaching. I was wrong. Do we pass inspection? Grandpa asked. You exceed it. Fletcher signed the paperwork with firm strokes. Contract fulfilled. Payment will be processed today. You should have your check by this afternoon. We unloaded the lumber into the Forest Service yard with help from the workers who'd followed us. By 10 o'clock the trucks were empty, and we stood in that yard feeling the weight of accomplishment settle into our bones. We'd done it. Against threats and sabotage and exhaustion that had pushed us to our limits, we'd done what needed doing. The check arrived at 4 that afternoon. Grandpa drove to the bank immediately with Grandma beside him. I waited at home with Rachel and Derek, too nervous to do anything productive. When they returned an hour later, Grandpa's face told the story before his words could. Debt paid in full, he said. Every penny we owed. Banknote satisfied. We own the ranch clear. He sat down at the kitchen table like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. For the first time in 6 years, we don't owe anyone anything. Grandma pulled out her ledger, made the final entries with hands that shook slightly. The debt column went to 0. The savings column showed $647, enough to see us through winter with a cushion we hadn't had in years. That evening Carl stopped by with news. Jake Morrison wants to talk to you, says he has things to confess. About what? About your son's death, about what really happened. We drove to Jake's trailer the next morning, October 17th. The place looked worse in daylight than I'd imagined. Rusted siding, weeds choking the small yard, windows that probably hadn't been washed in years. Jake answered the door looking like he'd aged a decade in the 6 years since my father died. Hollow eyes, shaking hands, the unmistakable signs of a man being destroyed by guilt and alcohol. "Come in," he said, voice rough as gravel. "Been expecting you'd come eventually." The trailer's interior matched the exterior. Sparse furniture, empty bottles, the smell of desperation and regret. Jake sat on a couch that had seen better days and gestured for us to take the chairs across from him. "I filed your son's blade," he said without preamble. "Samuel Whitmore paid me $500. Told me it was just to slow down your operation, scare you into backing off some contracts. Said nobody would get hurt, just property damage." "But someone did get hurt," Grandpa said. His voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "I know." Jake's hands trembled as he lit a cigarette. "I filed that blade partway through where the stress would be highest. Thought it would crack during operation, shut down the mill for repairs, cost you time and money. I didn't know Tom was going to push the feed rate that day. Didn't know the blade would shatter instead of just crack. When I heard he died, when I heard how it happened, I started drinking and never really stopped." He pulled a metal box from under the couch, opened it to reveal documents, photographs, receipts. "Here's everything. Proof that Whitmore paid me. Proof of when and how much. Notes he sent me about timing. I kept it all because part of me knew someday I'd need to confess." "Why now?" I asked. "Why tell us after 6 years?" "Because your grandfather's father came to see me. Hank told me what you folks were trying to do, how Samuel was trying to stop you the same way he stopped Tom. Said I could keep being a coward and let history repeat, or I could do the right thing for once in my miserable life." He pushed the box across to Grandpa. "Take it. Use it. Send Samuel Whitmore to prison where he belongs. It won't bring Tom back, but maybe it'll stop him from destroying anyone else." Grandpa took the box without opening it. "Thank you for telling the truth. It doesn't erase what happened, but it matters." "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," Jake said, "from you or anyone. Just wanted you to know the whole truth before I die. The doctors say I got maybe a year left. Liver's shot. Seems fitting." We brought the evidence to the sheriff that afternoon. The new sheriff, the young one who'd actually investigated the attempted arson, spread the documents across his desk with growing intensity. "This is a confession to conspiracy to commit manslaughter, maybe even murder, and the documentation backs it up." "What happens now?" Grandpa asked. "Now I arrest Samuel Whitmore." The sheriff started making phone calls, "and I reopened the investigation into your son's death." The arrest happened 3 days later. Samuel Whitmore was taken into custody at his office, handcuffed in front of his employees, charged with conspiracy to commit murder and multiple counts of attempting to interfere with lawful business operations. The bail was set high enough that even Whitmore wealth couldn't make it go away quietly. The trial wouldn't happen for months, but the damage to Whitmore Timber Corporation was immediate. Contracts were canceled. Employees quit. The bank started calling in loans. Within 2 weeks, the company was filing for bankruptcy protection. Within a month, it was being liquidated. The equipment and property sold off to pay creditors. Derek watched his father's empire collapse with mixed emotions. He sat on our porch one evening in late October, staring at nothing, working through feelings too complicated for easy words. "I should feel bad," he said finally. "That's my father losing everything. The business my grandfather built, my inheritance, but all I feel is relief." "Relief?" I asked. "That I got out before it destroyed me too. That I chose a different path." He looked at me. "Your family gave me that choice. Showed me what honest work looks like, what integrity means. I can't repay that." "You already have," Grandpa said from the doorway. "You worked beside us when you could have stayed comfortable. You chose right over easy. That's payment enough. In November, the college letter arrived. Montana State University, Bozeman. They'd heard about what we'd accomplished, about a 15-year-old kid who'd modified antique equipment using self-taught engineering principles. The letter offered a full scholarship to their mechanical engineering program starting the following fall. I sat at the kitchen table reading it 3 times, unable to process what it meant. College, university, a future beyond the ranch and the sawmill and the 320 acres that had defined my whole life. "You should go," Rachel said. She'd come home for the weekend, seen the letter over my shoulder. "This is an incredible opportunity. But the ranch needs me. We're just getting back on our feet." "The ranch will be fine," Grandpa said. "Derek's staying on as a full partner. Carl's agreed to help with major projects. We'll manage." "I don't know if I'm ready." "Nobody's ever ready for the next step. You just take it anyway." The family debate continued through November. I wanted to go but felt guilty about leaving. Grandma insisted education was the path to security. Rachel offered to take a semester off to help transition Derek into more responsibilities. Grandpa stayed quiet, working through his own complicated feelings about watching another generation leave. On Thanksgiving, we gathered around a table that held more food than we'd seen in months. Turkey and stuffing and vegetables from Grandma's garden preserved for the occasion. We sat together, the expanded family that loss and work and choice had created. Grandpa at the head of the table, Grandma beside him, Rachel and Derek across from each other, Carl and Hank Morrison at the far end, me in the middle, looking at faces that had become family through everything except blood. "I'm grateful for all of you," Grandpa said when it was time for the traditional words, "for standing with us when we needed it, for teaching an old man that fear is a poor substitute for trust." He looked at me. "And for a grandson who had the courage to finish what his father started." December brought early snow and the kind of cold that made the mill shed's metal surfaces painful to touch without gloves. We ran smaller projects through the frick, custom work for local builders, keeping the equipment working and the skills sharp. Derek operated like he'd been doing it for years instead of months. The transformation from soft, rich kid to competent sawyer was complete. Christmas arrived with the house smelling of pine and cinnamon, and wood smoke from the fireplace. We gathered in the living room on Christmas morning, a tree cut from our own timber standing in the corner, decorated with ornaments Grandma had collected over decades. Grandpa handed me a package wrapped in brown paper and twine, heavy for its size. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a wooden case, handmade dovetail joints so precise they looked machine-cut. I opened the case and found my father's millwright tools, precision measuring instruments, specialized wrenches, everything a professional sawyer needed, maintained in perfect condition despite 6 years of storage. "Your father would want you to have these," Grandpa said. "And I want you to remember that education is important, but so is where you come from. These tools represent generations of knowledge. Take them with you. Let them remind you that working with your hands is honorable no matter how many degrees you earn." Grandma gave me a framed photograph. My father at 20, standing next to the frick on the day Grandpa first taught him to operate it. The expression on my father's face was pure joy, the look of someone doing exactly what he was meant to do. "So you remember what passion looks like," Grandma said. "Engineering school will teach you mathematics and theory, but that photo will remind you why those things matter." Rachel gave me a leather-bound journal for your own notes, your own calculations, your own journey. Don't just learn from books, create your own knowledge. Derek's gift surprised me most. A wooden plaque he'd carved himself, the letters deep and precise. Built 1946, rebuilt 1967, by those who refused to quit, Hartwell and Whitmore Timber. Partnership papers are being drawn up, Derek said. Equal shares. When you come back from college, we'll be waiting. I had no words, just held that plaque and understood that family wasn't just about blood. It was about choosing who you stood beside when everything was hard. Summer of 1968 brought preparation for college. I spent days with Carl learning advanced techniques I'd need to know if I was going to actually teach engineering someday. Spent evenings with Grandpa learning the business side of timber operations. Spent weekends with Derek making sure he could handle the sawmill independently. In August, the college acceptance materials arrived, forms to fill out, schedules to review, the reality of leaving hitting me in waves of excitement and fear mixed together. I'd be the first Hartwell to attend university, the first to have opportunities beyond timber and sawmill work. The night before I left, September 4th, Grandpa and I sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the Montana sky. We didn't talk much, just sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes when words aren't necessary because understanding runs deeper. "You know why I froze that day," he said eventually, when I came home and saw the sawmill running. "Because you thought you'd lost me like you lost Dad." Partly, but mostly because I saw the past and future colliding. Saw Tom's dream finally working the way he'd imagined it. Saw you becoming the man he knew you'd be. Saw everything I'd tried to prevent actually being exactly what we needed. He turned to look at me and his eyes held something I'd never seen before. Not fear, not grief, just pure pride mixed with acceptance. "I was wrong to forbid you from that sawmill. Wrong to think protecting you meant keeping you from becoming who you needed to be. You taught me that." A 15-year-old kid taught his grandfather that fear can destroy you worse than any risk. "I didn't teach you anything. I just did what felt necessary." "Exactly, you trusted your instincts. That's wisdom I'd forgotten." We sat a while longer. Eventually, Grandma called us in for dinner. But that moment stayed with me. Understanding that sometimes the bravest thing a parent or grandparent can do is let go even when everything in them screams to hold tighter. Montana State was everything I'd hoped and feared. The campus sprawled across Bozeman like a small city, more students in one building than in all of Kalispell. The engineering program was rigorous, demanding, designed to weed out anyone who wasn't serious. I struggled at first with abstract mathematics that seemed disconnected from anything real. But then a professor suggested I build physical models of the concepts, demonstrate derivatives with mechanical systems, show integrals through fluid dynamics. It was absurd. It worked. The other students thought I was crazy, building little machines to understand calculus, but my grades proved the method sound. I came home for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Each visit the ranch looked more stable. Derek and Grandpa had taken on 3 major contracts. The mill shed had been expanded. They'd hired 2 part-time workers. The business was growing in ways it hadn't since before my father died. Summer of 1969, I returned with engineering knowledge and ideas for improving the Frick even further. Better blade guides using principles I'd learned in materials science. Improved governor systems based on thermodynamics. Safety mechanisms that would prevent the kind of accident that had killed my father. I spent June implementing the improvements. By July, the Frick ran 40% more efficiently than even my original modifications had achieved. The blade could handle loads that would have destroyed the old system. The safety features made operator error nearly impossible. September 1969. 1 year after Grandpa had seen my first modifications. I'd made the sawmill better again, transformed it from reliable to exceptional, using education combined with practical knowledge. The morning Grandpa walked into the mill shed and saw what I'd done, He stopped just inside the doorway. 40 seconds of complete stillness. I counted them again like I had that first time. His eyes traced the new blade guides, the modified steam system, the safety mechanisms that gleamed with recent machining. When he finally moved, it was to walk slowly around the sawmill, examining every change with the attention of someone seeing something both familiar and transformed. He put his hand on the frame the way he used to touch my father's shoulder. Gentle, respectful, full of complicated emotions. "You've made it better than it ever was," he said quietly. "Better than Tom imagined. Better than I could have dreamed. It's still the same machine at its heart." No, he looked at me and his eyes were wet. "It's evolved, like you have, like all of us have. That's what Tom wanted. Not just a better sawmill, a family that kept growing and improving and refusing to settle for good enough." He pulled me into a hug, the kind of embrace that said everything words couldn't reach. We stood there in the mill shed with sawdust motes floating in September morning light. 3 generations of Hartwells connected through work and loss and love that survived both. Jake Morrison died in October of 1969. Liver failure, just like the doctors predicted. His father Hank came to us with the news, his face showing the complicated grief of losing a son who disappointed you but was still your child. "Jake left something for you," Hank said to Grandpa, "a letter." The letter was simple, 3 paragraphs apologizing again, expressing hope that his confession had helped, asking that we remember he'd been a good man before Samuel Whitmore corrupted him with money and fear. At the end he wrote, "Tell Jesse to keep building things that matter. Tell him some of us never found the courage to stand up to powerful people. He found it at 15. That's worth more than any amount of money." Samuel Whitmore's trial happened in November. The evidence was overwhelming. Jake Morrison's confession, documentary proof of payments, metallurgist reports on the sabotaged blade, testimony from workers who'd heard Whitmore make threats. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, attempted arson, interference with lawful business operations. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in state prison. Whitmore Timber Corporation was liquidated to pay restitution to our family and others he damaged over the years. Derek sat in the courtroom for the sentencing. Afterward, he stood outside in November cold, watching his father being led away in handcuffs. "You okay?" I asked. He thought about it. "Yeah, I am because I'm not him. I chose differently. That matters." College continued through my sophomore and junior years. I excelled in mechanical engineering, developed a reputation for practical applications of theoretical principles. Professors started asking me to demonstrate concepts to other students. I became a teaching assistant, then a tutor, helping freshmen understand that engineering wasn't just mathematics on paper. It was solving real problems for real people. Summer of 1971 brought an opportunity. The university wanted to develop a new safety curriculum for industrial equipment operation. They asked me to help design it, drawing on my experience with sawmill modifications and safety improvements. The curriculum we created became a model for other programs. It focused on understanding equipment psychology, recognizing when machines were telling you something was wrong, building in multiple fail-safes. We used the Frick as a case study. Students visited our ranch, saw how proper engineering could transform dangerous equipment into safe, reliable tools. I graduated in May of 1973, top of my engineering class. The commencement speaker talked about using education to make the world better. I thought about sawmills and timber and families that refused to quit. Grandpa and Grandma drove to Bozeman for graduation. Rachel came from Missoula where she'd finished her nursing degree and was working at St. Patrick Hospital. Derek closed the mill for the day and made the trip. Carl and Hank Morrison rode together. We filled an entire row in the auditorium. After the ceremony, standing outside in May sunshine, Grandpa handed me an envelope. "Your inheritance," he said. Inside were partnership papers, equal ownership of Hartwell and Whitmore Timber. Derek and I would run the operation together. Grandpa and Grandma would retire, finally able to rest after decades of grinding work. "I can't take this," I said. "You built this." "We built it together, all of us. Now it's yours and Derek's to build even further." That summer we expanded operations, hired 6 full-time employees, bought modern equipment to work alongside the Frick, took contracts throughout western Montana. The business grew beyond anything we'd imagined possible 5 years earlier. But the Frick remained the heart of it all. We kept it running, maintained it with religious precision, taught every new employee on that machine first. It was history. It was proof. It was the answer to anyone who said impossible goals couldn't be reached. Years passed. Derek married in 1975, a woman from Kalispell who loved his transformed character more than his family name. They had 3 children who grew up around sawmills and timber the way I had. I married in 1977, a mechanical engineering professor I'd met at a conference. We had 2 children who learned to read wood grain before they could read books. Grandpa Owen passed in 1982, age 83, peaceful in his sleep after a life that had been anything but. At his funeral, people from across the timber community came to pay respects. The church overflowed with workers and competitors, and people whose lives he'd touched through stubborn integrity. We buried him on the ranch on a hill overlooking the timber stands he'd managed for 40 years. The grave marker read Owen Hartwell, sawyer, veteran, father, grandfather, teacher, built things that lasted. Grandma Margaret followed him 3 years later, diabetes and heart disease finally claiming her despite our best care. She died holding the ledger she'd kept since 1947, the final entry reading balance, paid in full. Legacy, priceless. The Frick sawmill ran until 1995. 43 years of actual operation spread across 5 decades. 15 years under Grandpa from 1946 to 1961. 6 years of silence. Then 28 more years from 1967 to 1995, running stronger and safer than it ever had before. We retired it then not because it failed, but because it had earned its rest. We donated it to the Montana Timber Museum in Missoula, where it stands today with a plaque explaining its history. The machine that killed a man in 1961. The machine that saved a family in 1967. The machine that taught the difference between fear and wisdom. I'm 60 now, writing this in 2012. Derek and I still run Hartwell and Whitmore Timber, though we've handed most daily operations to our children. The business employs 40 people, operates across 3 states, maintains a reputation for quality that goes back to my grandfather's first days with a steam-powered sawmill. But sometimes I go to the museum and stand in front of that old Frick, put my hand on the frame the way Grandpa used to. Feel the cold metal that once sang with heat and motion and purpose. Remember the summer I was 15 and thought I could save my family by taking apart a forbidden machine. I was right, but not for the reasons I thought. The sawmill didn't save us because it milled lumber faster. It saved us because rebuilding it taught us to trust each other again. Taught Grandpa that protecting people sometimes means letting them take risks. Taught me that courage without wisdom is just recklessness. Taught Derek that you can choose to be different than your father. Taught all of us that community matters more than competition. My grandson, Thomas Hartwell III, asked me once why I froze when I saw what you'd done to the sawmill. He'd heard the story but didn't understand the emotion behind it. I told him what I've told you. I froze because I saw everything at once. The past where we'd lost so much. The present where we were fighting to survive. The future where things might actually be okay. I saw my father's grief and my son's courage and my own fear all colliding in a machine that represented everything we'd been through. That's what legacy is, I told my grandson, not avoiding mistakes, learning from them, not preventing risk, taking it wisely, not staying stuck in the past, honoring it while building something better. The Frick taught us that. A machine built in 1941, bought in 1946, forbidden in 1961, resurrected in 1967, perfected in 1969, retired in 1995. It served 4 generations and taught us all that sometimes the bravest thing is finishing what others started, even when everyone says it can't be done. Especially then,